Okay, so let's start this stream. I'm never quite sure how to start these things. My name is Daniel Guys. I'm the creative and technical director at ED Films. Um, I've been working on a shot for the project we're calling the Brown Bear Project. It's a little science-based animation, and it has this little deer in it. And I just thought I'm in the process of finishing it up, so I just thought I would demonstrate that process. I don't usually show the last stages of putting a shot together, so I thought I would go through that a little bit with you. And it seems all of a sudden that my playback's not working. I just want to show you where we're at with it. Just gonna try to find my playback. 'Cause for some reason it's not playing. It's weird. Sometimes this happens and I just have to stop After Effects and restart it, which is, we're off to a good start. Okay, so this is stuff we're trying to wrap up for the early next week has to be wrapped up. So trying to move as quickly as possible. So I'm reusing a lot of assets from some for this project specifically, and others I'm reusing from Let There Be Light. Some of the trees and stuff like that. Actually, sorry, I'll just put myself here. So we'll just go through this in a second as soon as it loads up. But essentially, I'm taking some of the stuff from this shot here, just like the actual like bits of trees and stuff. I'm taking some of the foreground bushes. I'll try to pause that. So I'm taking some of the foreground bushes and things and using it to flesh out the scene a little bit. Because this is a shot that's kind of in the middle of nowhere on this actual this animation. So it comes out and it's a bit of a gag. So we have this bear character in the shot, and this animatic was done by David Seitz, who's working with us. There's this little deer that pops up, and it's sort of this joke about the bear eating differently on the food chain because his natural food source is becoming toxic because of pollution and bioaccumulation. So he looks over at this little deer, and I'm trying to make this shot that sets up this really cute deer in this really picturesque shot that feels almost like a bit like Bambi or something like that. So that's sort of the point of the whole shot. So we go from this bear and we look over at this little deer, and the deer is so innocent and wide-eyed because it's basically suggesting maybe he eats younger on the food chain instead of older things. Anyways, won't get into all the science behind it, but so that's the point of the gag. So I'm just trying to populate that scene up. I posted a clip on YouTube of the deer and we got a lot of positive feedback on it, which is great. So it's a pretty simple rig, so it's surprising what you can do with such a basic rig. We're almost done loading up here. It just takes a bit of time. So I lost my capacity to play back. So unfortunately, I had RAM rendered this whole thing, but now it wouldn't play back, which is unfortunate. So we'll play. There it is. It's back. It might just take a second to render. So I've thrown in some assets from Let There Be Light, and I've put in some other things that I made specifically for this project, which is mainly some of the little grasses and stuff, which I animated as paint effects in Maya. We're gonna do a couple other ones too. But right now, what what I see is I look at this frame and I kind of squint my eyes a little bit, and I see a couple of areas of conflicting light and dark. And I think there's a good variety. I've already worked down some of the chaos that was in here. I've tried to create a warm area right here with these plants here. This is sort of like a warm spot where the little deer is, just to keep our eye centered in this little patch. I'm going to add some basic lighting to this and a couple of other things like filters and effects, stuff like that, just to polish it up and bring it together. I thought it might be a good place to demonstrate that process, like how a finished shot comes together. So, and also some of the effects that might happen on some of these bushes here. So this is stuff like I didn't have time in Let There Be Light to make everything move like I'm doing in this one. So in this forest scene here, the camera is moving so much too. There's not really much of a point having all the plants swaying and the breeze and stuff like that. It's a diminishing return because the camera is moving so much your eye barely catches the movement. So for the amount of render time it adds to add displacement maps and to like import all this like animated grass and foliage, doesn't necessarily sell the scene. So like having a few particles of leaves and stuff falling actually bring the life that's required for that kind of shot. For this shot, however, the camera is pretty static. There's just a truck in or a truck out. And with this kind of shot, it helps to bring the forest alive just by having a few animated elements and a few little things here and there that are moving. I'm going to show a little technique. Hopefully it'll work. We'll see in this top little bush here in the corner. This little thing up here. I hope you guys can see my mouse moving. This little bush here could possibly be moving a little more because well, basically we have these windy little grasses and things blowing, but not everything's moving the same. So this one I feel like might move a little bit. Now, it's funny because when you play like games like the Witcher and Skyrim, um, all the forests are kind of moving all the time. And I grew up in a forest, and that doesn't quite happen. Like the forest can be very active, but it can also have little active patches and then completely be still in another spot. Like wind is fairly organic how it moves through spaces, and sometimes it cancels itself out and it doesn't do anything. So it's okay if not everything's moving. It's sort of this thing in video games where they add a sort of a noise filter or a noise displacement to all foliage and trees and stuff like that, and they'll kind of move constantly. And that's actually, it's just not really the way it is, but it's what we expect in what would I say, sort of an exaggerated reality. Um, okay, so I just want to fix a couple of these little bushy things. So let's have a look here. Now the thing about doing displacements, like this one I might do, but I might not. Mostly I'm concerned about this one because it just sticks up so much. This one here. Now the thing with this is a pretty massive layer, and we're only using a small chunk of it. So I'm going to mask it off. I'm not sure 100% if that helps render times or not. I feel like it does, but I don't know for sure. I can't say for certain. Okay, but I'm going to just mask off a little bit because we just don't want, I don't want the computer dealing with anything that we're not seeing, if this actually helps. If I really wanted to be thorough about it, I would actually take this and I would go into Photoshop and actually crop it and make a new file. But I think my computer's fast enough that it can handle the render on this. Okay, so one of the things I sometimes do to give a little bit of movement to stuff is use a turbulent displace, which is it's a common thing that's actually used in games a lot, a sort of similar style. If you watch, like if you ever play games like Ori and the Blind Forest, you'll see similar techniques executed. So I'm just going to put, because the shot it's one shot, I'll just use a time variable on this. So I'm adding a offset for evolution, and I'm just going times 300, and this will like progress the value up as time moves. It's just an easy way to get something moving. The only problem with it is it's really consistent. So I'm just using this to look at and keep track of right now, to have some movement on this thing. The next goal is to actually, I will have it go up and down a little bit so it's not just constant, which is certainly not realistic. Now, this noise is too subtle or too fine. So right now it looks like we almost have the leaves and stuff underneath a sheet of glass or something, of rippled glass. So we got to be careful. We really have to be careful how much we put on and what the sizing is. You can do multiples, like you can always have multiple filters on, which sometimes I do. Let's try twist smoother. But you have to be super careful with this. Like it's easy to overuse, and it's easy to make it look just kind of bad. Twist isn't the right solution. So like right now it's moving way too much. So my process is typically finding the balance of subtlety and just enough detail to make it feel like something's happening. But this is just too much. It like feels like we're underwater. The size is probably too much. We can increase the complexity of this, so this actually makes the noise a little bit, there's finer details in the noise, so you'll have smaller noise areas, and then you'll have your like large general ones. So as you increase this complexity, there will be tinier and tinier samplings of noises within the big movements. So that can be good for little leaves and stuff like that. But on a big piece like this, where there's a combination of tons of different types of materials or of plants and all kinds of stuff, it's not necessarily going to work. I'd say in general, this looks pretty bad off the bat. Let's just see if we can move this down. Really want to go subtle. And if you can't go subtle with it, I would just personally, for me, recommend not doing it at all. Because it definitely can, it can kind of just, it can reveal the flaws in the scene and just make it not feel good anyways. That's not so bad. It still looks a little watery. So let's scale this up even more. I'm not sure what I'm looking for in this specifically because I can't capture the individual plants moving. There's no way to do that without making individual plants. But what I'm just trying to get a little bit of sense of movement. And that just requires experimenting over and over again until you get a feeling. And once you get one working, then it's pretty easy to apply that to other pieces. I'm not going to do it to everything at all. I'm just going to do it to key things that feel like they need a little bit of movement. So I'm also going to try the offset. I'm just going to offset the turbulence. I'll just keyframe this manually because it's really a short shot. There we go. So we'll see how that feels. And then the next step for this, Colin Harvey CG is saying that you could mask off the effect for individual plants. That's absolutely true. You could totally do that. I'm just, I'm just a little bit lazy at this point, I guess would be the word, to go through and do that properly. Because you definitely would want to have like a nice feathering on your masks and stuff so that they blended well. Make this even bigger. But he's totally right. Like you could really mask off this little one, this patch here, and have this one moving differently. You really could go and manually flesh this out quite a bit. And actually, even something I've done before is you can use the puppet tool on these things as well. It's not always the best solution, but actually, maybe I'll just show you it. So let me just save this. I'm just going to purge my memory really quick because I bet you I'm high. Yeah, I'm at 30 gig almost, or 22 gig. Welcome to the stream, by the way, Colin Harvey, CG. Thanks for your help on those shots that with the deer rig and stuff like that. It worked out really well. Sometimes what I'll do is you can puppet tool these things. I mean, this is probably a bit crazy to put. Oh, you know what? It's probably not going to be very work well, I bet, because it would be better to, let's just undo something really quick. If we wanted to puppet tool this properly, I just realized it's not going to work the way we want. You got to mask off, you got to create your mask area. It's probably the best way to do it. So if I just create this really quickly, create a boundary area for everything. And you could do individual plant layers as well. Like that's obviously an option. I've done it before in a couple things for sure. Just moving plants around manually, which can work really well. I'm more doing this for demonstration. I'm just trying to, like, ultimately for me, the shot really just has to get done, and it's a matter of like moving as quickly as possible, which obviously this is not doing. Okay, so once you set that up, that mask, you can come in and we should be able to put the puppet tool on it now. It's weird that it's expanding out like that. Maybe I need it Let's try to put it before. It shouldn't expand all the way out. I'm not quite sure why that's happening. Let's just check the expansions at 1. It could just be, I don't really know, because usually the puppet tool responds to the alpha channel or the mask. This is not responding to anything, which is really weird, because usually with layers it takes to the okay, we're locking mask 1. There you go. Cool. Colin just said to lock this mask 1, which worked. So it's locked, and now we're getting what I would expect. Thanks, Colin. Should just have you on the stream all the time. You should be making a stream, actually. Okay. So this is, this is a little bit crazy, but you can literally do stuff like this. So what I do if let's say I were to do something like this is you rewind the whole scene, you press Alt now, or Control now that you've put the pins in, and you just go like this. I'm just sort of imagining it blowing in the wind a little bit. So I'm just holding down the Control button, and then now we've got this plant moving. Now the good thing is some of this plant is hidden off. Like you don't see all this stuff, so you're not going to see the grass moving. Probably the smartest thing to do would create little patches and mask them off and stuff like that. But we're not doing that for this specific example because this is just an example. So I'll do some here. Trying to keep my movements just really subtle. Let's see how it's feeling. So I get jerked around a little bit on this one, which probably will be okay once I drop the frame rate down. We'll see. We'll see. Can always fix those little jostles. Some of this could be happening. The little jostles can happen because, well, either the keyframes were set too early, like if there's a keyframe here. But the other reason it can happen is because if there's Bezier curves happening and the movements are too tiny, then sometimes they collide with each other, but that's not always the case. But we can just go spatial and we can go to linear, which is sometimes a better way to go. That can sometimes eliminate any weird little jerks that you get just because 2 frames are too close together and the curve makes a crazy handle. But that's a bit too linear, so I'll just undo that. Okay. Oh, I just lost my... Can't redo, of course not. Okay, that's fine. So then what I can do for this is if wherever the jerks are, I'll just delete the offensive keyframe. Like right there. It's probably this one here. There we go. So there's just probably too many things compacting together here. Okay, cool. All right, so let me just redo this one here. So I'm going to hold Control, grab this thing. Okay, cool. And then I'll do this one. I think this one might move to the one I just did probably moves way too much. It's like a complete party plant. Let's have a look. Yeah, they're moving a little weird. Like it's still pretty stiff, but let's just see. Don't give up hope yet that this could be viable. Okay, the next thing to do is, because of the way I like things to look, I don't like them to be really smooth. So at this point, I'll add a posturized time on this one. Now this can work really well sometimes, and other times it can not. Sometimes it creates out its own problems. But this may work well for this specific example. So right now we have the puppet tool working on it, and we have a little bit of a turbulent displace working on it, which should be enough to give us, a little bit of life in it. It's probably too much. All right. Yeah, like some of those plants are just flying. I might even drop the frame rate even more. And I want to move this puppet pin here. Oops. The rhythm is just because I have it probably an inherent rhythm to random motion that I go to. So everything seems to be moving at a similar rhythm. So I'm just going to take this and move it down, copy it, and then paste these frames so it loops back. But just so it's a little more out of sync with that other plant. Now, I wouldn't recommend doing this on all layers, not just because it can make things really busy, but secondly, it's pretty processor intensive, just especially too because I have like 100 million layers. Oh, Colin is offering forth a nice little piece of code here. Colin, what is this like? What does it do? Like, what does it do? This, I've never used this little bit of code here. I'll put this on here. And also, do you just put that on every puppet layer? Like if you're doing it here? Because I know you could use a smoothing expression as well. But I would be interested to know what this is exactly doing. It sounds like it looks to me like you're minimizing the effect a little bit with this little expression here. So you're taking the keyframe's value and you're subtracting its value from itself. I don't know. Yeah, I'm curious what this is doing. And then you're halving it and then you're adding it back on again. Well, it works. Handy little code here from Colin Harvey CG. Awesome. Thanks, man. That's great. What else did we animate? This one. I'm going to put it on this little pin because this one I was doing a little too much. Plant party. Okay, so Colin is saying it finds the delta from the first keyframe. And then I can't read the rest of the comment because it's cutting out. I'll bring it over here. And then halves it. Okay, so it finds the delta from the first keyframe and halves it. That's awesome. I wish I was as good at expressions as you are. I think it would be making this process even simpler all the time. Colin's been helping so much making these rigs and stuff. Stuff that I would have to look up or I would just redo. He's just like, oh, well, here, check out this or try this. And it's awesome. It's helping so much. Okay, so this thing's an undulating mess of stuff. Is it too much? Not sure. I think what we can do, I think the puppet pin movements are totally fine. It's possible the turbulent displace is just a little too much, even though the amount is at 1. But you got to be really careful. And the posterized time isn't active at the right frame rate. So, okay, so this plant's there. So I guess now the thing is to put everything else around it. So Colin Harvey CG is saying you can change the, so in that little expression that we were using right here, it says you can change the 0.5 value here to however much you want to lower it down. So this will either have it or put it to 0.25 and that'll make it 25%, or you can attach this value to a slider. You know, so create a variable and tie that to a slider, an expression controller, and then use that to control things, which would be a great thing if you did it through an entire scene. You could have this ready to diminish any kind of effect that you've keyframed, which I think is a really great thing. That's a great little feature. All right, so let's have a look. It's going to take it will take a minute to render because I also have depth of field on this thing. But I'm just going to render a little bit, and I just want to see if the movement is enough. Because like I said, I don't want to do it everywhere. That's not really the point. And then I guess the next step we'll do is, I think the colors in general are okay. I'll show you what I did to some of the colors and even to some of the plants and what the actual plants look like. And I think the colors in general are all right, but we may find there may be a need to do some things here and there. but we'll see in a second. So my little deer, the little deer, if you notice as it's rendering, moves on every second frame. So I have the deer's time posturized on 2s, I believe. So every second frame, the deer will move. I just find that that makes the animation look a little bit less CG, and also you don't have to refine the animation as much. Oh, and Colin Harvey is saying you can even amplify the effect as well by having a value greater than 1. So in that little value we were looking at with the 0.5, if you make that greater than 1, you're going to exaggerate the value of the keyframes, which is really handy and would save a ton of time if you've animated something and done a lot of work on it and you want to exaggerate the effect. That's actually a really great little solution. And it's super fast. It's really tiny. I have to learn about that key, the finding the delta value. That's fantastic. So much to learn. So much to learn. I guess that's the thing about expressions and everything like that is there's so much you can do manually. But you have to like if you want to use expressions well, you have to invest a bit of time in learning them. A lot of people are pretty scared, especially artists. You're scared of not artists specifically, because I feel like coding is an art in itself. Um, but I think people who are more comfortable with the manual labor process of creating artwork, getting in the headspace of using code can be a little bit intimidating. And also, we tend to get really comfortable with our limitations. So, which I do too. You get comfortable with your limitations, and you don't want to try to learn a bunch of coding stuff because it feels like it will take you longer to learn it than just to do it manually, which can sometimes be the case for sure. But you definitely, these little bits of things save tons of time. And once you wrap your head around a little bit of it, it's all starts to make a little more sense. And I'm hoping that on this channel, we'll be able to break down the barrier a little bit for these kind of things that are intimidating and scary to learn. Because I definitely find I have to learn a lot of software for everything. There's always a lot of investigation into what's going to make things go faster. And, for every program you get, it saves you some time, but also costs you a lot in others. But I think it is important. It is important just to focus and commit to something, especially if you have a project. You don't want to be switching software through a project. But in between projects, I think it's helpful to investigate software and learn things if you can. Or just watch people. That's the other thing. I guess like the cool thing about the Twitch creative stream is that which I want to do too, is I want to start learning Moho and learn Moho from the perspective of someone who knows After Effects. And it might be better for me even to watch somebody learn something to see what the possibilities are versus investing all that time right up front and stopping what I'm doing to try to work through something. Oh yeah, Colin Harvey's saying conversely, sometimes they wind up doing more with coding and it would be more efficient to do it manually. I do exactly the same thing too. Sometimes I'll like on this deer I didn't do it, but sometimes I'll rig up a thing and there's like code everywhere. It's like super procedural. It's amazing. It takes me 5 minutes to animate, but some of the times the features would have been easier just to animate and get them done. So it's kind of like what I was trying to do on this deer the other day with the eye. And it's like when you look at the shot, it's like 5 seconds or 7 seconds of actual animation, and that eye, I could have just manually moved it. And I actually ended up doing that just with this neck piece because I didn't like the way the neck piece was moving. And I could have coded it and done some stuff to try to make that neck work better. I just ended up grabbing the puppet pin and moving it when I needed it because it wasn't working. Okay, that's a little better. I think the movement is too much right now on the puppet thing. So that little piece of code that Colin Harvey CG has put forth is going to be really helpful. But I think the amount of movement is enough. I mean, I'm glad it's moving. I think it's moving okay. It's not bugging me. Okay, so what I want to do with that is I want to do exactly what Colin was suggesting, or Colin Harvey CG, sorry. And I want to go to our little puppet tool, let's press U. I'll find that expression that we threw in. Thanks for that little tip. That's awesome. I'm going to use that all the time now. We'll put it to 0.25. I'm not going to put a slider on it because I'm really doing this to one layer. And again, it's sort of like we were just talking about. is you could go through the effort of sticking a slider on and doing all that extra stuff, but for diminishing returns for the investment it would take. So it's a little bit easier just to do it manually. The main thing with coding, I think, is, which is really important, and I was just talking to a couple of people we're working with about a project they're doing. They're about to embark on a pretty big, it's a 3-minute film with some character stuff, and they've got a lot of character shots. And the main thing is um, the animator's done some rigs, which are solid, right? They're good, but they're very manual. And for the amount of shots they have to do, if you're going to animate something manually, like if you are comfortable with that manual process, it can be better just to stay there. But if you're in the very beginning of a project and you're looking to, you have a lot of animation to do, and it's sometimes better if you just have a really solid rig. Your animation can just like go really quick. But the rig right now is it's a bit more old school. I know she's basing it off an old tutorial that I did like back in the day before I really used WIP. So it's very manual. Like it's puppet pins that are being controlled by rotators and stuff like that. And it's working more what they call forward kinematics. So yeah, she did good work, and the different deformations are nice, the structures are nice and stuff like that. But the actual process of animating that is pretty manual. So for me, I can't afford that time anymore to sit and animate something, because the thing is you change where the hips are, all of a sudden now all the feet don't touch the ground properly and stuff like that. So that's the beauty of WIP tools. And okay, so I'm probably going to tone that down just a touch more. Because the thing I want to watch for too, this is on a total other note, is that really, like, if you're new to the shot, your brain is going to be attracted to the warmth, the light, the eyes, like probably the eyes first, right? You're gonna, because our brains love faces, so the eyes will be our main area of focus. But I want to make sure that these plants don't pull our eye, because we're drawn to movement. Eyes first probably, and then movement. I can't remember the order, but I got to be careful that I don't have a sudden movement when there's action that's important for the character going on. So I really want to, I'm going to tone that down more and probably move the keyframes. Actually, you know what? And I need to put this code on that other little plant thing I did here, because this one's probably moving. It's the most moving right now. So let's just copy that and paste. Okay, sorry, this render is really slow. I think what I can do is I'll turn off the depth of field. That'll help. Bonk. Everything's gonna get uglier, but it's okay. Look how fast it is without depth of field. So fast. Sorry. I I should have been rendering it without depth of field on. Okay, so this will just take a second. Oh, actually, it was rendering super fast because we'd already rendered those frames, but it's still rendering a lot faster. I might do a little bit on these little pink plants in the front. I'm not sure. I want to be I want to be careful that we're not distracting from things. I might just use a little bit of the turbulent displace on those. We'll see. That's better. It's still a little bit much, so I think. Oh, squirrel's getting in the garbage. I either tone this down more, so let's go even more. Man, this code is awesome. I would have had to do this so many times. We would have been on our third pass of animating this by now. Let's see how that feels. Colin Harvey CG. I was talking to, I don't know who all is on the stream right now. There's 5 of you, but I was saying we have a screening at Hot Docs in Toronto of Let There Be Light, and it's kind of exciting because, at least for me, that stuff you showed me, like the little bit of code that you showed me for this shot here, for this guy's little pipe that's on his bike and stuff. Granted, it's small and you don't it's not super obvious, but a lot of the little things we were working through that one day have ended up in the film, which is super awesome. And it's screening at a pretty big festival here in Canada. And so that's pretty exciting that something we worked through on Twitch is ending up in a movie theater before audiences of hundreds of people. I think it's awesome. So I think it's really cool. I'm hoping that we can do more of that kind of stuff as we work through real film projects and things. Like input and feedback from viewers can end up on the screen, which is pretty sweet. Okay, so I think it's moving better. I just want to now, I'm going to just offset some of the animation because it's just a little too active at those moments. It's more those beats that are a bit too much. So maybe I'll just tone it down here where there's less movement here. Just at key points where the head's coming up and we really should be focusing on the deer. I don't want the plants like flying all over the place like they are. And I can just copy these keyframes and move them because it's just a general cycle. And I'll do this for this plant here. This one. Just going to move this. So I'm just looking for areas where there's not a lot of movement in the keyframe. And the other thing I could do is I've combined that with Colin Harvey's code, but also I could just delete a bunch of keyframes. That's the next step. Cool. All right, let's just see how that's moving. It's a very slow process. I don't want to put too much crazy time into this thing, which we're already doing, as happens. So I want to do just a little bit more plant movement and then move into lighting and stuff like that. I try not to, because I use so many layers, you can't paint, like I've said this a million times, you can't paint and sculpt the layer like you would in traditional animation layout. You've got to be a little bit more flexible and things that need to be a bit flatter. Like this deer, all the sculpting of the roundness and stuff has actually come from using layer effects. As anyone who saw the original would know, it's actually really flat. And I did that intentionally. I painted it really flat so that when the body changed shape and position, the lighting would mold more naturally to it. The only thing I don't love is right here, this guy is moving like a maniac. This little pin. Offensive little pin. So what I'm going to do is delete this out. There. I'm sure that'll look fine. Just calm things down a little bit. Cool. So last time we render, and then we'll move on. I will break down this character a little bit more just to show, but I'll do that in a separate stream because those little overviews people tend to really like, and I don't want them to have to slog through a stream to get to it. Unfortunately, some of the streams I was doing some backgrounds, and it seems to always happen whenever I try to do like part 1, part 2, and part 3. Something always happens. So what happened on Twitch is we had a whole bunch of backgrounds streams we were doing, and I'd finished them, but I forgot that Twitch takes the streams down after a while. Like I think you have a couple weeks, and then it gets pulled down. And that actually made it so those backgrounds we were doing with like the train and all that stuff, I have one of them posted to YouTube, but the other ones never made it up. By the time I went to go post them, the next ones, they were no longer in existence. We're trying to see if we can get them back, but I doubt Twitch has them on file somewhere. Cool. I think that's moving all right. Still think it's like a little bit. Man, I was just partying on that one. I was just so excited about moving that guy around. Cool. Okay, it should be fine. This one, I'm just like going to proactively delete some of these. Great. Okay, so I think that's fine for now. I think what I'll do here is I'm going to take the Turbulent Displace one and just put it on a couple other of the layers here. I think this one I want to do just a little bit on it, and I will also change the offset starting point because I don't want it to have the same rhythm exactly. Actually, we can just change the time offset here to like something like 200. Oh, and this is starting at a weird time. And I'll move this on the Y a little bit. So let's also fix this one, because this one has a weird keyframe in there that I just noticed. It's starting late. Those keyframes on the puppet pin don't matter as much. But this thing, okay, that's okay. Cool. All right. So let's just see how this layer is looking. Also, okay, posterize is posterize on that layer? Probably not. I should have just copied and pasted. That would have been faster, but inefficiencies abound. I feel like that is probably just about enough movement for that thing. Maybe put it to 1. I may increase the complexity. I'm not sure. I'll have a look. Could be a little too much now. Yeah, it's tough. It's so tricky. Definitely don't want it to be too much. And let's put this to 5. Let's see if I can get smaller movements in it. Well, it's definitely moving a little too much now. Okay. 4. Yeah, it's still moving way too much. So let's put that back to 3. That was working fine. 0.5 is fine. I think that was better like that anyway. It felt a little bit more, just enough to be something. Cool. All right, I'm going to leave that. Great. Fine. Okay, so next thing. I guess I want to talk about really quick some of these plant layers I did. I've talked about these before. People always ask me. I make them in Maya, and I use Paint Effects right out of the box. And then I just tweak the settings until they look good. So I make these little ugly patches of grass and stuff like that, so you can see them. These ones probably move too much. These were meant to be for a scene that's out by a river, so the grass was kind of meant to move a lot, which is fine. It doesn't always work, but then I place them in the scene here. And then I put this, for this specific one, I put a gradient ramp on them. So the gradient ramp allows me to change the color of them, because I don't want all the details. Like you could fade it, to 50, and then you'll get some of the details of the grass blades and stuff. But for the design of this project, I don't really want that. I kind of want I just want it to feel like a color. Or, sort of like it'd be nice if it had some brushwork to it, but I don't want to go in and, like, the only way to make brushwork in this is to create a layer mask and then to put a textured thing on. I just don't think it's for this project. It's not worth the extra effort, at least not right now, and the increased render time. So I've placed these in here, and I have a bunch of them. But when I get to, like, let's say I want a light, I have a little light patch here. I'm just doing this for instance. If I want to create some more life in this spot. Go here, and I'll just take this. I have a whole bunch of them, like I said. I've got a lot of little things. This one I've got like a little dense foxtail grasses without the branch. I use this one a lot. I'm sure anyone who's familiar with our work is just like, oh, I see this everywhere. You use this constantly. So to make it less of a feature, because I don't want it to be something that's really dominating the scene, that can be achieved with color. Like, you're going to achieve a little bit of it with depth of field, which is important and helpful. But then the other thing is like, it's more of a rule of painting, is color and contrast. So what I can do here is I select a color of a layer that's kind of close to it, and I want to neutralize it a little bit, but to also have a color transition on it. But now what I can do is, because I'm using this color gradient thing, you can sort of change the colors in ways that's more what I'm looking for. And the idea is to make this more subtle. It's also a little bit dense, so I want to bring it down a little bit. I want to look at it with and without it, because it's not always going to add. Sometimes it just takes away and it doesn't look very good, because right now I think the potential, we're hitting that threshold where it's just getting to be a little too much. I might put it behind the deer actually. So let's just push it all the way back to 125 or something, because the deer's at 0. 200. I'm just trying to get it behind that little this shaded bit right here. If you look behind, you'll see it, it'll pop behind there eventually. There, that. So now what I want to do is I'm going to grab this color and grab, if I grab the two colors and make them the same, it'll just sort of map to that, but I'll modify this a bit and cool that off. It should be this color here. Let's have a look. I'll bring that like that. Okay, and this should be the light color. Yes. Okay, I might lighten this guy up even a little bit more. Let's go for actually one of this really bright yellow. So you can see it's pretty subtle, and it may not be necessary in that location, but once, you know, I think we have the posturized frame rate, the curves are there. We can probably eliminate these curves. That's actually, these curves are what keep pushing that color into the wrong direction. I was trying to get it more this brownish color. Cool. Okay. Now that's there. I don't want to ruin that little light patch, but I want to push it down just a little bit. So there's a lot of ways to manage color in a scene. So you can put stuff in front of it and break it up a little bit, or you can push the tint of that layer behind it down. Colin Harvey CG is asking if I render the grasses from a perspective camera or orthographic. Usually, that's a good question. Orthographic is fine, because perspective, like I do a thin line, like they're just a thin line. I literally paint a straight line using the paint effects, and then I taper the edges with pressure, and so it doesn't matter. We don't, like, this was probably shot with an orthographic camera because you can see some of the layers, some of the grasses feel a little bit lower and they're getting higher, and that's just because of perspective. Some are probably closer. You can do either or. Sometimes I find if I shoot it with a orthographic, like being a side with no perspective, everything gets too much the same size. So sometimes they can get a little bit more variety, but it really depends. Like if you take a look at all these, they're a little bit different. This one's like lots of branches. This one's just straight up grass. It's ugly. Like the colors are terrible. Sometimes the renders didn't work out well because I had accidentally left an ambient light on, but it didn't matter for that specific execution because I'm using these gradient maps. I'm just using them as alphas. I usually use them like that because I don't like the way the paint effects look. They look very paint effectsy when you're actually looking at them fully rendered. Just going to move this a bit. I do like that little light patch. I don't want to distract from it too much. So I'm always juggling the balance between just enough stuff and too much stuff. I tend to overdo everything, like I said a million times. Okay, so I think we have lots of movement. I want to just focus on lights really quickly, or doing the next level of this scene. I could put like fog and stuff in. I don't think it's really necessary. I'm trying to drive it more with color, but I do have, I'm pretty sure I have clouds or something. I'm just going to do a search here. Cloud, no. Let's try fog. Okay, so I have this stuff. I have these little foggy layers, which I always paint. And these for me are really helpful for creating ambience. Or like if I have to tone down the contrast of a scene, they can be really helpful. Like right now, this one is a pure gray. It's kind of a grayish color, but again, I can use a tint or a fill. I usually go for tint on these ones because I do paint light and dark into them. So if I do tint, I can push this from, it's like, you know, it's a whitish color to more of a, like a greenish or a yellow or something like that. And that will just give me, as you can see, it starts to neutralize. Whoops, that's a terrible color choice. Well, maybe not. It kind of looks awesome, actually. That was an accidental cool thing. But you can see that it can help reduce contrast. I like the way things are cooling off back there, and I think that the background pieces I was able to get in there look fine. They look actually pretty good. But if I wanted to, I could use my fog to cool things off even more. And obviously the opacity is ridiculous, but usually I'll layer these a lot, and you can just push things just enough to give it some variety, and you know, push things back a little bit. I think potentially, I'm not sure. I don't love the green of this big log here. of this tree. I got to do something about this thing, but I'm thinking it might come together with some lighting. So we'll see. We'll just try and we'll see what happens. Let's try it. The other thing I can do with lighting is just add some dappling and stuff on the little guy. Let me just want to see something really quick if I can. I may have to do a tint push on that log on this, like, I'm just finding it's green or something. There's something off about this tree stump, which I like it, but I'm almost wondering if I like it too much and I'm just trying to make it work. These are just some of the trees from the Bowen Island scene. I just threw them in there. They're far back enough and stuff that they're not completely disparate from the style of this piece. This specific short is definitely more inky looking. So that's without the tree. I like it a little bit without the tree, but I also feel like I need some kind of anchor for the edge of the composition here. I think it's just that the tree's got this kind of cool green color, which isn't necessarily blending super well with everything. Might be better if it pushes more into the purples or something. I could try a tritone tint, which this is like something I just do for making something really fast instead of wrestling with curves and things. Just warm that green up a little bit. The other option is you could do curves and just add red to it or something, because this tends to desaturate stuff really badly. But I'm more just trying to see at this moment if warming it up makes it work better, or if my eye's just getting tired of looking at it. Or let's try the contrast really quick. Maybe it's too light, maybe it's too dark, I don't know. There's something about it which I'm not totally a big fan of. Don't know what it is. Could be that it's too dark. That feels a little better for some reason. Okay, well, I'm just going to leave it for now because I'm not sure. I'm not sure. And if you're not sure, I personally recommend just keep moving. All right, so let's go here. So we don't have a ton of layers here, but there's definitely enough to wrestle with or wrangle. So I'm also going to just offset a couple of these guys. These are my grass layers. They're animated to be about 20 seconds. So I can just offset them and reuse them and stuff, and the animation doesn't sit on top of itself. Okay, so let's see what happens if we put a light in here. And the other question we have to figure out is, are we going to be using shadows or not? We'll go for like a nice warm lighting, which is sort of the intent of the whole scene. We're definitely going to have fall off. I'm not sure what level of fall off we want. Okay, so this is a way back light. I may just go with white because there's so much color in the scene already. I don't want to lose all my nice colors because I really like those pinks and stuff like that. So we can just push this to white. But I did like it a little bit warmer. So let's go here, a little there, and let's see. The subtlest things make differences. Okay, now I think I usually put an ambient light in just to keep the number of lights I need to do down, but that really depends on how I'm breaking the scene up. So the thing you can do, let's just go negative 3000 really quick. So I've got this one little light. I can make its fall off a lot shorter. So now it's a very small area that it can affect. So right now it's out by the camera. Now it's getting closer to the deer. 1200. We can't see it yet. It's around here somewhere. There it is. So what you can do with lights, and I did a video on this on YouTube about lighting in After Effects. What you can do with lights is you can isolate now, especially that After Effects has radius fall off on lights. You can start pushing a scene and coloring it the way you want. So if I want to warm just this little pocket up and really bring some focus on this is what you do in a painting if you're a layout artist for animation anyways, is you would do this in a painting and you would sort of paint that right into the illustration. Okay, and then I can, maybe I'll increase the fall off on this or reduce the radius, 1500. So everything will just start to be isolated in this little patch. And I want to make sure, right now I'm highlighting the ground more than the deer. I want to make sure that I'm close enough to that deer that we're getting mostly the deer. The idea is the focus is on the deer. Okay, so now I can take this light. So now we have two of them, which is offensive visually. But now what I can do, if the painting wasn't quite working, which I think it's mostly working, but also I like to experiment because sometimes I just get comfortable with something and I stop really seeing it. So what I can do here is I can really start more aggressively pushing the color palette, breaking it up a little bit. If I want this to be more of a cool back here, it's like as we get further back, we're not just getting darker, but we're also, this is like everything behind the deer has now got more of a bluish tint to it. Whether that's good or not, I don't really know. I couldn't say at this moment. I think it's probably too aggressive. I liked, like what I'm starting to lose is all that nice, this stuff that's going on naturally in the frame. So I want to be careful of not, but like, it's kind of cool, the different things you can do. Like that's neat, right? Not for this shot, obviously, it's not the right tone for this shot, but it's kind of cool, right? And then if you were to have another little light there, but it was a different color, like you can create moonlight, right? Moonlight's actually a little bit more green than that, but anyways, you get the idea. With this, I probably wouldn't use like a blue. I'd probably go more to purples or pinks. Now it looks like some kind of crazy theatrical ride. Oh, welcome to the stream. I don't know how to say your name. Quadrator? Quadrator? Sorry, I'm butchering your name. You don't have to rush to watch it. You know, the only thing that's going to happen with the old streams is they're going to disappear in a week. But we, thankfully, Roxanne at ED Films, she is archiving them for us and putting them to YouTube. Right now they're locked, but they're all being archived and put onto YouTube so we don't lose them all again. This is kind of neat. It's a bit theatrical, like I was saying. It's like, but I sort of I like it a little bit. The other thing for me to do is just to turn the lights off every now and then and double check and see if we're improving the scene or making it worse. I feel like there's some improvement happening here. There is some worseness happening as well. Like we're losing some of the greens here, but we are starting to isolate the frame a little bit, which is cool. I like this. I like this idea of this like old school approach of really having your foreground objects quite dark. It reminds me a little bit of those old LucasArts games, like Day of the Tentacle and stuff, where you have these scenes that are framed by these dark foreground objects, and I always really responded well to that stuff. Uh-oh, I did something sticking. Okay. All right, we'll make a new light. I think I'm going to do an ambient light. Just a white one. Put it pretty low. And whoops, I want that to be ambient. Now this ambient light, its position should not matter. But what this can do is like it can bring back some of our foreground detail if we want. I'm not sure about this. So this is, I don't usually stream this stuff or like do tutorials on this stuff because it is so subjective and very iterative. It can take quite a bit of time. And I'm not sure how much people really honestly care about seeing this aspect of it. So I'm bringing the light a little bit closer to the background and seeing as it changes things so much, right? Where it's positioned in the frame. So now we're getting this little dark patch. We have a light patch, which can be really cool because we're getting a play of light, dark, light. But also we want to be careful not to break the scene up too much and make it distracting. I'm just going to read the comments. Some of them, they get cut off on the edges a little bit because the screen there is small. Oh, thanks. I can call you Lars. That's great. I'm going to try to remember that your screen handle is tied to Lars. I'm pretty horrible with names at the moment, but thank you. Yeah, Lars is easier. Perfect. If you want to send me like your phonetic version of how to say your name, that I'm not sure how to write phonetics, but anyways, thanks for joining us. It's cool to have you here. I think I'm feeling like this background light is a bit too light. I should probably name this better. I'll just call this BG and call this Deer. I feel like it's a bit too bright, but I'm also losing so much of my nice purples and stuff, so I have to figure something out here. I might just bring it up a little bit because I want to capture stuff up here without making a big hot spot down here by these trees. Okay, let's see how it's feeling by comparison. The thing I was feeling with the light before, or the composition without lights, is it's a bit busy. There's just a lot of stuff going on and a lot of contrast in the frame. And this is helping to reduce some of that. I mean, obviously I can take some stuff out and smooth it out for sure. But there's definitely a lot of stuff going on. And so I'm trying to manage that without having to manually tweak a whole bunch of layers and stuff like that. I think what I can do too for the deer light is maybe we bring down its fall off even further. Whoa, that's a lot. That's a lot of nothing happening. Let's see if we get closer. Okay, so we're at negative 600. This is a very deer specific light now. Okay, so we'll be at negative 1,000. So now the deer is really highlighted. So the intent of the scene is getting more what I was going for, to like have the background be more less the priority, but we have no color now. But I feel like there's something looking a little better about this. Just what in something about the tone of it. I'm just bringing up the fall off a little bit more so we get a little more color back here. Let's try 1,500, which is probably too much. Yeah, we're too much now, in my opinion. I'm gonna move this over. I want to get some of the lightness back in this area here. Okay. Now, I'm not minding this. It's working better. I think now we want more of a foreground light. This light, we can either make, like, there's a few rules to painting that they're not like hard fast rules, but they're definitely things that get you in the right place a little bit faster. I think our camera's around negative 3,000, so this light will be definitely more near the camera. There's some rules, and some of the rules are in landscapes, especially. Things closer to the viewer are typically warmer in tone and have higher contrast, or darker. They tend to be like, they have higher contrast, and that's why something like this feels so good right away, is because these darks, they really set up depth really clearly. It's really graphical and really clear. That's why games like Limbo look so good instantly. You're just like, they just have that solid foundation of depth, and the rule feels good. And then, so things that are closer tend to be darker, have higher contrast. Things that get further away have more atmospheric, diffuse, the diffuse light, the diffusing effect of the atmosphere and the hazing effect increases. So they move closer to the color of the sky. So as things go further back, typically, like unless the sun's right behind them, there's obviously the rules change, but we can use those rules to set up something if it's not working and we're struggling. You can be like, well, the rules here dictate maybe I should darken the foreground, and just do that immediately. I think I made that light's radius a ridiculous number. Oh no, it's not even that big, but it's too much. Maybe I need to move this light even further back because I find it still affecting pull it to 6,000. Okay, it's a little better. And we'll bring it lower. Okay. The other thing is that when you're doing backgrounds, again, another rule sort of is that your subject where you want your eye, people are typically more drawn to warm areas than cool areas, but every stage of everything that your eye is drawn to is dependent on the relationships within the composition, right? And it's dependent. So we're drawn more to warmer colors, but we also, what overrides that is contrast, like light and dark. And then what can override light and dark is movement, and then faces. So there's all these things that, when all put together, can change the focus of a scene. And right now, what I'm doing is I have this foreground light, and this is like, I like to experiment. And it's funny because I was really a terrible painter, really terrible when I started doing this stuff. But being able to experiment like I'm doing right now actually allowed me to help understand lighting and composition a bit better. So then I got inadvertently better at painting in some ways. Because what I'm doing right now is I'm taking this foreground light and I made it really cool instead of warm. So a rule of composition or painting, just, a general rule, is that things that get closer to the camera, they are warmer. But sometimes you can have them really cool, because in a forest, the forest has really inconsistent lighting. It's not, there's things getting in the way of lights. It's all so you really can have dappled, patchy lighting, and it can really be an effective composition tool. So the rules really start to break apart in a more confined space. Just trying to bring up a light a little bit because I'm finding the contrast is just a bit too aggressive. But I am liking the cool effect, I think, like the cooling effect versus making it warm. So let's see what it looks like if we warm it up. Sorry, the composition is so small. I always do this. I always work so little. Okay, so here we'll use more of a sunlight colored light. It gives a different feeling for sure. There's an element of warmth there where it feels a little more inviting. And then versus when we cool it off, let's try purple. It changes the tone. So one thing we can do is we can photograph that. And let's warm it up. I'm not sure which I like better. Sometimes I try to fight my inclination, because my inclination is I'm always drawn to really warm things. And what can happen here is, at least in my opinion, is that this is really warm, but it's warm everywhere. There's a lot of warmth in this scene. The deer's brown worms, the grass is brown worms. It's like a lot of warmth. And what I feel like with this purple light happening is it's cooling off and making a little bit more of an interesting palette in the boundaries, or sorry, in the around. We're getting stuff that's a little bit in contrast to the deer. We're obviously affecting the color of the deer a little bit because the light acts like a tint. But I personally think, after looking at it a few times, my gut is like, oh, I really like the warm. But as I look at it, as far as looking for intriguing colors and stuff, I'm feeling like the purple is really more in my jam for sure. So I wonder if I can just undo and put it back. Yes, awesome. I kind of like that better. Great. I think the deer is possibly starting to get a bit overexposed, because we have a lot of lights stacking on top of the deer. So with that, I would just take this and we'll just reduce the intensity of this one to like 80 or something, which it'll make the cool light more powerful. The other option is to like reduce both of them. Make that 180, make this 90. And then if we want, we can increase the ambient just a bit. If the idea is to reduce some of the contrast in the foreground. I can always warm this guy up more just with color correction. So, okay, so all that's working pretty good. I think I like the way we've isolated the lighting on the deer a bit more. I want to be careful. Like I want to put like little patches of light and stuff everywhere, but I feel like it will distract from the deer a bit. The next thing I wanted to do, which I've done this before. I think I've demoed it. I did a few tutorials on lighting, so this will be nothing new to anybody who's done them, but we might as well go through the process. I want to use this shot as just a little bit of a demo of a whole bunch of different things. There's something we can do. There's a few ways to do this. There's a couple ways to create dappled foresty light, which I'd like to do on this little deer. Um, there's a couple ways we can do it, and some are more efficient and effective than others, but it really depends. So I'm just going to save this, and I'm going to import off one of my effects drives as soon as it spins up. Okay. So I've got what I have stock assets, and this is where I put all my stuff that I've made. Some of the stuff is from Video Copilot, the effects stuff, which is really handy. I've got these grass, plants, and paint effects. Daisies. I think I want to grab some daisies in here, which I think would be pretty cool. So I'm going to grab these daisies that I made a long time ago, because it might be nice to have some little flowers in there. Those are just like stock right out of my paint effects. Okay, something's happening. I might end up turning some of these lights to a spotlight, like the one, especially the one on the little deer here, like this deer light. Instead of having it right now, it's influencing so much of the whole frame. This could be converted to a spotlight. I'm not sure. This might break something. Oh no. In general, it's okay. It's really wide though, because with a spotlight, I can change the cone angle. It's like to 90 or something, and then we're really just highlighting the deer. And then pull its position back. We'll have to increase the fall off because it'll get dark real fast. But the spotlights, I'm actually thinking of doing a spotlight only because I also want to add some shadows on the deer, like little dappled light on the deer, and it's a little bit easier to control if you're using a spotlight versus a point light, because the point light, the shadows tend to get really fuzzy and blurry as they fall off on the outside of the light itself. So, and it's harder to control the direction of the shadows too. So I can do that with a spotlight more and still isolate where the light is falling. So let's take its fall off. Needs to be a lot bigger. Oops, that's not right. Radius, 4,000. There we go. Which is probably too much. Well, it might not be because we got to pull this light back quite a bit. We want to point it up a little bit more, be like more like this. So I'm moving the light back and up, back and up, back and up. Just trying to get the focus of the light a little more where we want it. Cone angle, let's reduce that even more. There we go. So we're getting the same effect. Whoops, we want to move this over. But now I have it's a little bit easier to control. So it's like a spot, just a spotlight, like stage lighting, which is cool. I think that's pretty good for now. Some of this stuff, which I don't love what's happening here, I might tweak some of the colors on this branch. I'm just going to, maybe I'll do that right now. This guy. It's a little bit too much. Let's see if I can just blend with original a little bit. See if that helps. Just toning it down a little bit. I might want to push it to the greens a bit more. Yeah, it's not good dark. Let's go 0. I might, because right now it's drawing a bit attention, too much attention to itself. We'll lighten that up a little bit. I don't mind it sending out a little bit, but I don't want it being so demanding. If I push it into the greens, it should duck back towards that tree a little bit more. And let's make the base of it a bit cooler. So I'll sample one of the cooler greens from the bottom of the tree. Cool. And then let's see where that position is. I'll bring that down a bit more so it can get a bit lighter. And then this one is up here, so we'll put it here. Maybe I'll move it over this way. Let's go like this. Weird, there's this gray thing happening here, which I didn't notice before. What is that? There's a gray patch. I don't know if you guys see that. Is that a hole or is that? I feel like it's grass or something, but Not sure. Probably happening because we have two different colors of lights. Possibly. Let me just turn all these lights off and see if that goes away. Yeah, it's like this. There's this little area that's turning completely gray. Whoa, color correction on. Whoops. That'll have to be fixed. That's too intense. I'm just going to double check to see if I can find where this gray patch is living. All this stuff is looking a bit gray because of the lighting, because of the foreground lighting, which means I might have to pump a little more color into it, possibly, because the color is neutralizing. This is another thing, a paint, like light's a little bit different, but if you take in painting anyways, and please you can correct me if I'm wrong because I'm not like 100% on my color theory and stuff. I usually have to look it up a little bit, but in color theory, if you take the complement of any color, and so if you have, let's say, a green, and I believe the complement of green is like a purple or something. I could be wrong. I know the complement of, oh, it's red. It's a red. If you mix two complement colors together, they kind of cancel each other out and become a gray. So what's happening, something that's going to happen is this, I have this purple light, and it's actually tinting this green patch to a gray. It's essentially muting, it's neutralizing the color out of it and turning it into this gray. So I want to be careful with stuff like that. So usually once we apply color correction to all this, that's going to go away. Like this color correction is insane now. It doesn't work anymore. But when we apply color correction to it, it'll take care of those things, but it's just stuff to watch for. So just something in the plethora of 10 million things you need to think about. It's just one of those things. I'm going to warm this light up even more because the purple is neutralizing the warmth a bit. So I may even, what direction can I push it to kill off that red? I want to kill the red out of the purple because it's making this a little bit cyan. Is cyan the right color? I can't remember. It's just making it too pinkish. And I can neutralize that by adding more green into this red. The downside of it is it'll make this background little patch here where this tree is, it could make it too limey looking. But then to fix that, I can just reduce the radius of this thing. But that's too dark now. You can see how finicky this process is. It can take a while. Okay. I also think we've lost some really cool stuff just with the lighting itself. Like we've lost some of these nice little shapes here, but not too badly. Actually, we've held things together pretty good. When I turn all the lights off, I'm seeing definitely more of a cohesive feeling for the scene. It's starting to feel a little bit better. It's less distracting anyway. So this is the thing that happens too, is when you're using a million different parts from different projects, like what I'm doing to collage something together, the light can be your sculpting tool to help make everything a little more cohesive. I might increase this radius just a bit to get a bit more color into this area. But also the downside of that is I'm not loving how bright this patch is. Just can't win. It's a juggling act. So push this over. I might reduce the radius again. I just don't want that being so bright, but I kind of want to bring this up just a little bit. Bring its position up a bit more. This down a bit. I can also increase the feathering on the edges of the light. So that's on the cone feather. It's at 100%. So we can reduce or increase or decrease that. Okay. I think we're fine. Things are okay. One thing that's not amazing is the very far background. We've lost a lot of, it's like just gone to black, which is not really what I want. So I might make another background light and push it way back. So I don't want that background area black. So let's just turn that light off and on. So now we can control that very far background area, because black is definitely not what I want. I can, so I'll call this just FBG for far background light. And I can experiment with the color. I think we definitely want to be in the coolish area, possibly. Green's okay. We could live in the purples, sort of like what we have in the trees, really depending on what kind of feeling we're going for. That's too dark. I really think it needs to be lighter. It could just be like a grayish blue color. Let's just see what that does. It's not bad. It's a bit green. Or we could just go with white light, and that lets the whole thing just sort of live where it. That's better. I kind of like it better like that. I'm not sure about what color yet, though. I think I did like it when it was a bit more purple, but it's a bit aggressive, I suppose. I'm gonna leave it like that for now. I kind of like it, but we'll see. Okay. Next thing is what? Shadows. And really want to be careful with shadows, because shadows can look really, really bad, especially if it's supposed to be foliage and stuff, and bushes aren't flat cards. So if you have shadows, light casting shadows on flat cards, it can look really bad. You gotta be really careful. Okay, so I want to add some dappled lighting. I'm gonna do what I always do. Let's just save this really quick. I'm going to also have those daisies I want to throw in. I don't want to forget that, but I also want to import. Sorry, we got completely diverted. I just want to get some branches. So we'll go take the oak branch, this one. I should be importing multiple files. I'm wasting time by being a little bit lazy. This might take a second. So I've got an oak branch. What else do I have? I'll grab a leafy branch. I think this branch is like super leafy. It's probably a little bit gross looking. And then let's grab, I don't usually like that one too much. Oak branch. So what do you grab? Oak branch A or oak branch? I can't remember which oak branch we grabbed. Oh, don't know. Let's just do B, I guess. Okay, that's fine. That's lots. So now I'm just going to change its frame rate to 24. I think I'm using 24 on this composition for now, because David was animating in TV Paint everything at 24 frames per second. Yeah. So that's 24. Let's just double check the alpha channel on that. Yes, pre-multiplied. Okay. Control Alt C, and then we'll just paste with Control Alt V on these guys. There we go. So now what I can do, I've done this before, is we make a new composition at 2000 by 2000. That's fine. And we call this leafy shadows. Okay, and then let's drop oak branch, and leafy branch. Probably leafy branch is going to be too much. So let's take oak branch 1 here and oak branch 2 over here and rotate it. I'm just going to create a what is called, at least I believe is called in theater and stuff, it's called a gobo. And that's like it's like a shadow or light passing through. It's like what happens with stained glass or anything like that. Okay, we'll put this one here. I'm just trying to create something that will create a nice leafy shadow pattern with different spaces of detail, of light, of density, and open spots. Cool. Let's just call that good enough for now. It's about 10 seconds long, like the whole rest of the composition. A lot of movement in there, as you can see. Again, these are just Paint Effects brushes in Maya. I think they have them in Maya Light. Would be worth looking into. I can't remember. But Maya Light's really cheap. You could even just get a subscription with Maya and literally, like if you wanted to make your own, you could get a subscription with Maya. I'm going to delete that because it doesn't move very nice. And literally just use it for, because the Paint Effects are super easy. So you read up on Paint Effects and then you literally could just have a subscription of Maya for a month for a few $100, and you can make yourself a ton of little brushes or of these things. Just a ton, because you don't even have to render with like Arnold or anything. You just render with the Maya software settings, so you don't really need to be. I used this kind of effect, this treatment on a project like back in 2007. Like I've been using this technique forever, and it was before I did not know Maya that well at that point at all. But it was one of the easiest things to do is use their paint effects, and they're really can be night and day how they affect your environments. You get this all its life, and people are like, "How did you make that? It's so amazing!" But it's just a paint effect. Nothing amazing here, just a whole bunch of smoke and mirrors. Okay, now we have our leafy shadows. I can take this, bring it here. I'm going to parent it to the spotlight. And now that it's parented to the spotlight, let's just take a look in our custom view. I know I've been through this on a tutorial before, so I apologize for anyone this is redundant information. Let's pull this out. So the camera's that little pink dot in there. Our leafy shadows is now here. I've parented it to the spotlight already, so it's sort of zeroed out already. But then if I go 0, and 0, it will be centered on that spotlight. So that's the spotlight, I believe, right there for the deer. Yeah, there it is. And you see leafy shadows is stuck right on it. And now, as I pull it forward, you'll see that it will be lit by the spotlight, and any light that passes through it will create a shadow onto the deer. But you have to make sure you have shadows enabled. I know that the spotlight is casting shadows. I'll put its shadow darkness to 100, but I have to enable shadows on the leafy object. There you go. You can see automatically it did something. Now the trick, well, it's not a trick, but you can see that we can see the branches here. We either A, have to move the spotlight further back, or B, you can just tell it to only cast shadows. So we're not going to see the object, but we will see the shadows it makes. So let's have a look. That's with it off. That's with it on. Pretty subtle effect, but let's pull the spotlight just a further back. So I want it to be more general all over the scene, and then we're going to tweak this more. Lots of light tweaking in this. 35 maybe. I just want to again avoid that area right there being too lit up. And we have to increase the radius to 4,000 maybe. Bonk, there's the deers coming back into light. Okay, it's looking pretty good. I might want to point this light a little bit over. Bonk. Kind of hard to tell what's actually what difference it's making. Oops. Now you can see the dappled stuff. It will become more apparent. So if we turn down shadow diffusion, it will become a little bit sharper. We're at 50% resolution. So when you go to full, this will take a second possibly, but you will see the shadow light more so. Things can get pretty sharp, like possibly too sharp. But it's good to double check because things look very different at half resolution than they do at full res. Like look at that, it's crazy harsh. And at half res it looks pretty much fine. So you need to either increase the shadow diffusion. So let's put it to 100. Shadow diffusion, I believe, slows render down a little bit. It's too much. But if you're going to tweak this stuff, you've got to do it at full res. Otherwise, you're going to think, oh, that looks great, and then you're going to render it, and it's going to look like a garbage pile. Okay, so now the next thing to do is what I think I'll do here is I'm going to isolate this, and the little deer. Oh, that's a little shadow. I don't even think I need that shadow anymore. Okay. Actually, let's keep all the lights on. So now we can see just the little deer and the shadows that is on the deer. I just want to adjust this leafy shadows layer until the shadows are doing something nice to the deer. And I want them obvious enough, kind of obvious, but not. I'm rotating right now. I'm just rotating the template to see, because I can also move it around, of course. And I kind of want, the idea was to like get the face mostly highlighted, like the little deer's coming out of the shadows. So I kind of want this dappled light stuff. No, that's interesting. So here we go. Let's pull this over. Don't really want any on his face if I can help it. Okay, let's bring it down. I mean, there's probably better ways to do this where you're not using a light, because it's a little bit tricky when you're using a light because you have less control. You could probably just use like a layer on top of a character. What I do like about using the light though is it's consistent over the whole background, so there's a rhythm to it that and an unpredictability, which I kind of like too. So I don't mind not being able to control the layers super well. But that's why I put like a blank patch in there usually. So you have kind of sections you can work with. I know there's kind of an empty zone in the middle. I don't like how dark this is all getting. You can also, of course, tone down the transparency. And the other thing to do, tone down the shadow color, or put up light. So we can also put up light transmission, and that will push the shadow from being such a purple to picking up the color of the leaves, which are quite red. We could tint them to green and stuff like that. But let's just have a look how that feels at the moment. The cool thing about it is the leaves will be animated and moving just ever so slightly, so it'll feel a bit like blowing leaves casting shadows. Another way to do this is to create like a turbulent displace or turbulent noise layer that, you know, has lights and darks undulating, and you can use that as a shadow pass. Oh, I'm rendering it full. Well, I have to, so this is going to be a little bit slow. I like right now how the deer's face is in shadow, and I'm hoping that as it comes up, it'll come out of the shadow. And like I was saying, you could do this with just a layer, and you use the character as an alpha matte, but you definitely would then have to go through, and it's not going to match up with the environment the same way. I kind of like it working that way. We'll see. So let's see if we're getting a sense. So you can really see the patterning of the light. Once the character's moving, you can really see that feeling of the light. Well, let's see how it feels once it moves. Just have to work through this for a little bit longer, and then we'll have the lighting. I've got to do it at 100%, otherwise I'm not going to really know how it looks. I want to try to finish this up in the next half hour. I just realized there's a chair with child pajamas in the background, which is not very professional. Move that over. Not that you guys can probably see very much anyways. There. Now it looks like the house has no dirtiness to it. Okay, we're almost there. I might just render it. We'll just have a look and see how it feels. I could sit here forever. I'll try to do this when it's not on your time so much. Okay, I don't mind that. I mean, I'll probably tweak it a bit more, but I like the feeling of it, I think. It's a little guy coming out of the shadows. Cool. Great. And now, we'll just I'll just save this really quick. I might purge the RAM, or sorry, the cache. 29 gigabytes. Okay. Slow process. All right. There's a little deer. Let's see how that feels. I really like doing the lighting stuff, but it definitely, I tried to do it in the National Geographic project and in the Let There Be Light project. It was just too much to handle, like to try to manage. It can add a lot, but it can also have a lot of, like, I think we're seeing some unpredictable results already on this, how it may not be 100% desirable. Because it does something to everything, which is okay. That's all right. But you want to just make sure that it also increases render time a lot because you have like your casting shadows, obviously. I think that looks okay. The only thing I don't love about the leafy shadows at the moment is it's right on his little ear there, or her little ear. So let's just move that light over a bit. Now it's on the little guy's, the little deer's brain. Okay, let's try to move it up a touch, see what happens. I really just want the face to be as clear as possible. Or better. And I might just tone down the effect a little bit. So like I'll decrease either the shadow opacity or this. You can go just the opacity of the layer itself. If I bring it down to 50%, that'll drop the effect quite significantly. I don't want to drop it too much though, because it is sort of, to me, it's an important part of the feeling of the shot. Cool. So I want to make sure this is posturized as well, because I want it to move with a similar cadence or just a similar style as all these other layers here. So I'll put it down to 8. I typically like to put my foliage movement and stuff like that at about 8 frames a second, less if I can too, because it feels more like those old anime films where they animated trees and stuff, but you just kind of like have this like boil of them a bit, and you're not, as an animator, going to draw every leaf at 24 frames per second unless you have an overabundance of money in your budget. Okay, so there is some things I don't love at the moment now looking at this. Like this green is really kind of flat brown. Like, sorry, this is like a really flat brown. So I want to just, there's a couple little things I want to tweak. We're going to get out of full res mode here. Some stuff will also be fixed with the depth of field, like these harsh lines and stuff. Depth of field is really important. For me anyways, I use it as like almost as a painting tool. So these like hard lines and stuff get softened, which is important. Hard and soft edges are really important in painting. So it's almost like it is a tool to create contrast and form, but also manage your hard and soft edges a little bit. So what I'm going to do here with these bushes, there's a couple of little bushes that I feel are not getting their due. And it's because I did a bunch of more color work on them while I didn't have any lights yet, which is what you should do, in my opinion. But that means I brought these down, so I can probably bring them up pretty easy again. There we go. That looks a little bit nicer to me. Let's go, just take that and go that a little bit. Don't want them too bright. But I just want to eliminate that crazy crushing dark a little bit. It's a bit heavy. And it creates so much contrast between this light and this spot. It's creating a point of focus for my eyeballs. So also let's adjust this. This guy here is a bit too dark. So let's bring this up a little bit and kind of grab in that area. Maybe even go lighter, potentially. We're going to see. This is another experimentation. Because I want to soften up the transition between this layer and that layer a little bit. So if I can kind of bridge the gap, it will help, right? And then the light layer could be what? But I don't want to create, see, this is creating too much contrast now. It's too different. That's better. If I squint at it, it's better. It's helping with this, but it is creating quite a bit of busyness in this spot, which is a little bit offensive to my brain. Let me just turn it off. It could just be too much stuff. Although I kind of like, there's something I like about it. Let's maybe try to use some of the color from this thing. See if that helps a bit. That's a bit better. Maybe even just move it a bit. It's just, I think it's probably like a lot of the little grassy layers. Plus it's now lighter than this dark background piece. So it's creating a high contrast between there and there. Like that stuff in the background is really dark. It may just have to be darker. I feel like when it's lighter, it's becoming a bit too distracting. Okay, let's just bring this up. Boom. We're in the purples a bit. Let's see how that feels. Kind of like that. I mean, it's a little weird, but it's kind of cool. I'm gonna just go with it. Who cares? We're going with it. That's okay. This one is possibly too light. Now it's too gray. We're gonna have to do that to a couple of these layers to just bring up the contrast a bit. Yeah, see how much that changes it? The grays? Wow. Yeah, I gotta do that. I might just do another, let's just see if this works. I might just do another curve on this and pull the darks down a bit. I don't want to affect the color as much as I want to affect just the general lightness, because I feel like it's a bit, now I feel like it's not working either. It's half that. Okay. Now, I just realized if I increase my contrast, or I could increase the saturation on some of these layers that have gone gray, like this one here, we can fix the, yeah, it's like really gray. Let's have a look what happens if we turn that off together altogether. The whole thing will go purple, yeah. Okay. So, let's just increase this a bit. It's getting some color back in there. And we can also push the hue a little bit. I'm just trying not to have to change my lights again. It's mostly because I have a purple light there. So I'm just pushing the hue right now into the greens and seeing what that does. And then, oops, let's go -10. This will push it more into the red zone anyway. That might be a better way to go. Let's try 50. Now I'm cranking the saturation to an absurd level. 25. It gets really acidic. However, I do kind of like that cool little patch of green that's appeared. I don't mind that. If we zero this out, it's definitely better over to the 10. Kind of neat. Don't mind it. I'm not sure. I'm not 100% sure. It might be a bit like busy. See, without any of that stuff. Well, that's just terrible. Let's just turn that off. Yeah, I'm not sure. Like we could go two ways. Like the forest floor has become fairly, it's very matchy with the deer, but that's sort of the point of a deer. I don't know. I like, there's something I like about it. I kind of like this little green that's appeared, this cool green that's kind of come in here. Is like, it's a little bit of a repetition of the greens back here, bringing that into the foreground a bit. So I do like that about it. So let's just leave it then. It's fine for now. Great. Let's go all the way to the end, see what happens. The camera moves so much. Well, it doesn't move that much, but we do, the composition changes between the first frame here, which I think is still rendered, is it? And then all the way to the end, we get just a slightly different composition because the camera moves back. See? So here we get a lot more of that spotlight effect feeling, but it's still working. I think I'm into this. I think I'm into it. I might want to like kill off a little bit of this oranginess on this back layer, and I think we're getting close to finished on this thing. It's so purple. It's crazy how purple it is. I mean, I guess I do have like a big bright purple light on everything. Okay, this one, I'll either tone down the saturation. We'll try this first because this is one of the easiest tools to use in color correction, I find anyway. I tone down the saturation, but the other thing is I could just turn it, push it into the greens a bit more, which is a little bit better. Let's try 10. Feels a bit better to me anyway. That's off. Although I do like that little patch of, I do kind of like the patch of orange. It's a bit unexpected and it complements, it's like a nice complement color to that green. As we go like this, it starts to neutralize it a bit, maybe possibly too much. Let's go -50, see what happens. That's going into the realm of a purple, which I don't like. When I was a kid, I would paint with my mom. My mom's a painter, and she's actually really good. She really knows her theory and stuff, and it used to drive me crazy doing this with her. We'd work on stuff, and she'd just be like, "Man, going back and forth." It'd drive me nuts. I can't. Thank goodness this is Twitch, and you can just like tune me out, go somewhere else if you want to. But you did drive me nuts when I do it with my mom. But it's so crazy how much it's influenced my ability to look at these scenes and do this kind of stuff. She helped me with this film I did back in 2007 called Aboriginality, and my inclination when I did scenes was to be very monochromatic and to do all my foregrounds would be really dark and my midgrounds, I just didn't, I was doing that very like Lucas Arts game look with my lighting and composition. And I was super conservative with my colors. Plants and trees were greens or browns, like browns and oranges, and then everything was sort of those colors. And my mom would get really excited about like lime greens and little splashes of purple and I at the time I found it super annoying. I'm like, that doesn't look good. Like, bleh, it doesn't look like a tree or those colors aren't in the forest. And I hadn't done a lot of plein air painting. I still haven't, but I've spent a lot of time looking at things differently and having her go through these things with me. And she would sit and say like, try this, and we would literally adjust colors for hours. I started looking at the color in the forest differently, and I started seeing colors differently. So it was actually it was powerfully beneficial. And you'll see once you start adding colors and looking at them, you will start, if you go out in the woods, you will see those colors. They are there. Okay, just wondering if I need to do one more leafy thing, but just for this area, it might be good to have this foreground light have another leafy guy in front of this foreground light. Let's just see. It might not work. It might be hideous. Let's just put it at -4,000. We can, oh, actually, we just did something really silly. I did anyway. I need to parent it to that light. So put it at 0, put it at 1,000, and 0, 0. So this should cast some kind of shadow on everything. Let's put it to 100. And I'll put the foreground's light shadow darkness at 100. See what this does. Could just create a big old mess. Well, that's turning the light off altogether, sorry. Now what this would do theoretically, I mean, I don't like how it's kind of darkening everything. It's probably because the thing is too close to the camera. The shadow layer is probably too close, sorry, to the light itself. Not sure. Okay, so now we're seeing really strong shadows. But what could be good about this is if we tone down the shadow intensity. Oops. Oh geez. I just ruined something. That's so annoying. I just got rid of our composition, which is annoying, but oh, brought it back easy enough. Okay. this like shadow right now is pretty harsh, but there is a possibility of it might be really nice in some ways. I don't like how it's on the deer. We need to move that off or down and over. So now we're getting like these shadows on everything, which right now is good and horrible in two different ways. Let's just take this foreground light and we reduce the shadow darkness to 50. And let's make sure we're unfortunately we have to look at this at full res. So I'm gonna get a bit of a render here. Almost there. Okay. How does it look without and with? I mean, it's not adding a lot, but we can't tell really well until it's all moving. Okay, let's turn it off. There and there. Okay, so it's going to definitely add a level of pattern, moving pattern light, which is great. So let's just see how it feels. Could feel amazing, could feel just terrible. We'll see. Actually, I want to increase the length of this composition too to 20 seconds and control A. Okay, so we have light there, that's fine. Let's crop that away. Okay, Bambi. Okay, I just want to I'm just trying to, actually I should be at the end of the shot where we see the most. Okay, so we're almost at 2 hours, which is about as much as I wanted to spend doing this shot. I don't mind that. I think I don't mind it. So the thing that's going to have to happen though, which is unavoidable, I will have to just do a render and see how it feels. Okay, so it looks okay. We could ultimately be a bit dark, a bit too dark. So let's just do this really quick. I feel like we're possibly a bit dark in some ways. So I want to amp up the light on the deer. I really want it to feel like there are some really nice light spots in the forest. Background light is fine, I think. Might be too red now that or the far background light might be too red. I don't know. I kind of feel like there's something a little bit. Nothing happened. Well, sort of. We'll see in a second. It's a little long. Ugh, that looks gross. Let's leave it like that for now, I guess. I don't know. I'm on the fence about that. I'm gonna leave it because it's not horrifying. Okay. In the background is this light here. Let's just see. That's okay. I think the background color and contrast is good. I'm pretty happy with that. The ambient light's probably okay. Could possibly come up a touch. I'm nervous about it though. It could make everything look awful. That's okay. I'd rather be a little bit light than too dark and crushed and not have much to work with. So then our foreground light, that's okay, I believe. I'm pretty happy with, I think, with this because there's a lot going on, but I find that we're like losing just enough detail in here because my inclination also with a lot of stuff is to make this super contrasty and this foreground object super strong like it is here all over the place. But I do like how it's getting lost a little bit. So it's a mix of your foreground and your background blending together a little, which can be desirable. Let's see. I think maybe, so now let's put on the depth of field, which is pretty strong. I put it on pretty strong because I want the little deer to feel pretty small. And if the depth of field is really high, it tends to make it feel like a telephoto lens and that you're tucked into this little tight space and that the things that are close to the camera are really close. So the idea was just feel like tiny and little and looking at this little deer. So having a very strong blurry foreground and background and shallow depth of field, I feel like Makes the deer feel littler and a little bit, that space feel a little more cozy. I like what it's doing, the depth of field to all this foreground stuff. It really tones down the harshness of the lines and everything. So it should really help the deer pop and give us activity in the foreground, but not distracting hard lines. So I think this is ready potentially for a render. I'll just tell you really quick what I did with the depth of field since I barely ever talk about it. I have a hexagonal lens. You could do heptagon, octagon. I just do hexagon, whatever. I could do octagon. It doesn't matter. I try to keep it consistent throughout a whole film project though. Just to give that idea that there's one or two cameras being used and they're consistent. Diffraction fringe I put up pretty high, although it's not always necessary. And it's sort of like it's the way the blur looks on the edges. It really doesn't look like much until you really start cranking things up. The aperture default is 35 for this type of lens, which to me wasn't enough. So I would not increase blur level percentage so you can see how much all that stuff's come back. It's really, the focus is pretty sharp. So 300 is great. You could go really high, and the higher your depth of field is, obviously, the slower the render, the more blur you have. I don't play with blur level. I don't know if it's still a problem, but in the older versions of After Effects, if you cranked your blur level up, I did it on that Aboriginality film. If you crank your blur level up too much, I started getting these weird dots and noise on everything. So I found keeping the percentage to 100 and then changing the aperture was the way to go if you want to increase your blur. It was not good to increase the blur level. That could be something they fixed. I haven't experimented. It's not worth because you don't see it when you're just looking at it like this, but when I did my renders, I would have this like fuzzy noise on everything, and it took me forever to figure it out, and now I just don't go near it. Okay, so I think that's pretty good. I think I can do a render on this. So I would say, I guess like one other little thing. Okay, so let's just we're at 152 hours. So because we're on time and I like to be late with everything, let's take this and just add, of course, let's add more. Just to like take it to the nth degree. I have these little light beams and stuff, so I'm going to just see if they drop in nicely. I made them for something else. But these light beams, I'll show you how they work. Pretty basic. They're like caustics. I use them for caustics for water. But I can duplicate this effect and kind of use it for something else. But the way that works is... Where is it? Oh, so I just have this caustics layer, which is just a turbulent noise layer that's moving along, like that. Actually, we'll make a new one, because this one won't work. The general effect is right, but it's not going to work for us because it's like water. It's moving too fast. So let's make a new one. And you can see how to create little not dynamic, but moving light beams. Because we want it to feel like sort of the leaves are moving and the trees are swaying a little bit, so it's creating these little shafts of light that move. So let's do one. It'll be fun, sort of. Let's make it nice and long, because I want to use it for other things too, right? We'll call it light shafts. This is not caustics. This will be light shafts. So we'll create a new, we could create a new solid, I guess. It's probably the way to go. It doesn't have to be that high. We want it to be wide. Okay, and then on that solid, we'll go turbulent noise. We'll go to find noise. We can create turbulent noise, which is initially really doesn't look like much that you can work with. We'll go for dynamic progressive. What is that? It's like, looks like clouds almost. Don't need to be that crazy. Probably just turbulent smooth will do. All right, and we want to reduce the complexity to 2 or even 1 potentially. Increase the brightness and then the contrast way up. Decrease that brightness down. So now we have a more isolated pattern. We can invert this. We can inverse this. I was just reading your comments, Manrita, I know. I'm the worst. there's a guy, I can't remember, he was saying, he quoted somebody, I think it was at Autodesk, and um, he said that if you want to go from being a billionaire to a millionaire, get in the film industry or the film business. And he's just talking about how feature films don't make a lot of money, even for companies like, you know, some of the bigger companies. It's not the most profitable thing in the world, but it's because film can be, it's so subjective about what quality is, and it's so impossible to tell if a project's going to do well or not. So, anyways, and polishing stuff can be expensive and time consuming. So what I'm thinking of doing here is just kind of creating a back and forth movement, because it's not going to have, you could do like this. Um, so you could be like this. I guess if you watch real light shadows that are come from leaves, it's actually really interesting to watch, because it's like um, light shadows cast by leaves on, if you just look at them on a sidewalk or something, it's actually really interesting because the effect is so layered that you get these like little really cool like refractive circles that are, like if you they create these like little images of the sun almost. It's crazy, the circular blur that happens on leaves and stuff, especially if they're on the side of a white wall or something. It's actually really amazing. You can see how the light behaves, and it's really cool too, because if you really want to be, if you were playing with the light a lot in something like this Bambi, you can have multiple layers of the leafy shadows, and then you get a really nice density of the shadows and the play of light. It's expensive as far as rendering time, but it can be pretty brilliant looking. Okay, so this is probably moving too much. Maybe I'm going to increase the scale of this, because I just want little shafts coming in and out. Like, the fact that they're coming completely and disappearing might be bad news, but we'll see. We can always change it. Like, we may want to do the evolution so it moves forward and backwards, and we have a bit of a wiggle to it. And maybe we're just progressing forward slowly. So for instance, if we did like wiggle, how many times a second? So like 0.3, and we do something pretty dramatic like 25. And then we reduce the transition that we have from, say, 0, well, 2, we're at 7 rotations, so we'll do like 4. I'm not sure how it'll look though. We want some movement. The risk is that we don't get enough movement for it to really be worth doing, right? Oops, I know what I did. I did it on both keyframes. Okay. So now we have it's moving. There should be, the wiggles probably needs to be more. Whoops. Let's go. Okay, let's try that. I'm not totally seeing a huge difference here, but I'm going to imagine it's there. Maybe this is also too many rounds. Okay, and let's go 100. Okay. I might have to increase the scale of the wiggle, because I do want it to sometimes almost go backwards. And I could increase the complexity if I wanted sort of that chatter of what little leaves would be doing. We'll see. We'll see how it actually looks in the once we put the beams on, because all this stuff is going to collide with each other. Okay, so now if you may not have this effect. Actually, also I need to create a solid in the background that's just like as the same comp size, and it's black, and we'll put that down at the bottom. And then I'm going to create an adjustment layer, which I remember the hotkey for, Control Alt Y, and then I'll just put trap code shine. I find this is like obviously, no, not obviously. It's a dangerously overused plugin for sure. It's really popular when I first got into film and animation. I was working at the BAM Center, and I think I don't know if it had just come out, but everybody was using it like crazy on everything. And so it was definitely an overused effect. But if you use it subtly, it actually can be very powerful. So I'm just turning off the color because I wanted to use my white. So now I've got these little God rays. And like God rays are dangerous because you really run the risk of like looking like a total cheese ball on stuff. Like it can really be like too much. However, used subtly, like I was saying previously, they can be really wonderful and really make a big difference. So with this too, is we can turn off the source opacity on that and just have just the layers, the rays themselves. And again, for these, I would probably, well, it's questionable. Like you could put them at 8 frames per second because if you want them to feel like they're reacting to the wind and to the leaves and the general frame rate that I've put most of the leaves at are at 8 frames per second, I guess like my gut would say to put this at 8 frames per second as well. It's amazing what you can get away with as frame rate combinations in animation. It's crazy. I've talked about it before. You can just have a big old mess of stuff happening with frame rates, and for some reason your eyes just like no problem. Okay, let's see if we can grab it. Better save a. I guess actually I should talk about this really quickly for anyone working on projects like this. Iterative saving. I'm sure I said it before, but look how many of these bare things I have. I'm on 15 now. Normally I put the date, but now that I have this date modified always showing, I don't worry about it as much. But I try to save like a new version constantly, just in case, because there is such a thing as After Effects becoming corrupted or applying some effect that just like that makes everything in the entire project angry. Um, and it just doesn't work anymore or something happens. So every time you load it, you get like this weird error message. Like I've had these things happen and it's horrible. So you got to be super, like, you just got to be careful. Okay, light shafts, blending mode. We can do screen, I guess. Okay, so they're clearly way too heavy. Also, the color is wrong. We want them to be the color of the light a little bit more, so we can do a tint on that if we want to. Doesn't have to be a tint. You could do a fill, I think, maybe. I don't know. That's a good question. In my brain, it's a good question. I don't know if it is really. Okay, so I'm gonna go for this like yellowish color. Okay, so like as you can see already right now, is they look pretty cheesy right off the bat. Like super cheesy. So we have to be really careful. Also, I'm going to make sure that they don't accept lights. So I don't want them reacting to my lights at all. So we don't want them to receive lights or accept shadows. So that keeps them immune to the effects of lighting. And now I'm going to push these way back. Well, further back anyways. So magical. Okay. See how far back we should go. I just need to take a look at some of these layers because I have all their positioning turned off, so I can't really see how far back everything goes. Also, this thing isn't quite organized anymore. All my layer orders aren't organized, so I'll run that little plugin that we made to organize the layers better. So that's 1117. So if we do 1220, that's just below this, which I think is a good space to start. And then we'll scale this thing up like pretty big. It's kind of fuzzy, so it doesn't matter, at least to me. I might want it behind that tree though. So we want to go back past 1300 because that's the tree right there. It says big tree. So let's go 1400. Bunk. There we go. Now let's move it up a bit. Another thing to remember. Oh, Colin, I'm just reading your post right now about something. Let's scroll down. You're telling me the latest update exploded one of your rigs, but only one of them. You have no idea why. Yeah, that's like I had a similar thing happen, but it wasn't with rigs. It was with the wiggle. I was working on that National Geographic project, and you know, when you're dealing with like as many layers as I was dealing with, you have a like a camera wiggle, and the camera wiggle is embedded in the coding, which is fine. But what happened is that I'd rendered out all these layers, like my background layer, my fog layer, like because I had to do it with a more traditional rendering pipeline. Like I try not to work that way if I can help it, with a traditional render pipeline because of, you know, certain problems that can arise. But anyways, one of the versions, I can't remember, they must have been, it was like 2 years ago when they upgraded something. The actual, the default math value for wiggle changed. It's kind of hard to explain, but so in After Effects, if you have a wiggle applied to something, the seed, the random seed or whatever it is consistent in every composition. If you copy and paste a wiggle onto a unique camera on the orientation, I think in every composition it'll sort of have the same. If the layers above and below are exactly the same, like if you have a wiggle on an orientation and you put a layer above the layer with wiggle on it, the wiggle will change, the value will change. But anyways, when they did the update of a version, it changed the wiggle value. It probably changed the core math of After Effects, and none of my composites worked anymore because I had all these like custom wiggle values. I had these trees that were based on wiggles and all this kind of stuff, and all of it fell apart. So I could only render it in like 2014 or something like that. I couldn't use the latest versions. But it was needless to say, it was pretty horrible because I couldn't figure out what I did wrong. And it turned out like I don't think I didn't really do anything wrong. It's just a fundamental property had changed. So the camera wiggle was wrong. The like all the trees were wiggling differently, so the shadows weren't lining up anymore, and the fog wasn't lining up because I had to do these weird depth pass fogs. I don't know if these beams are actually honestly working in the far background. I have to be prepared not to use this thing we just made. It's not horrible. I don't know. I don't know if it's adding anything. Kind of like I don't like what it's doing to the background layer. Let's try. Let's just put it. Maybe we'll just put one in the foreground and see if it helps. Yeah, I prefer the background darker. All right, so let's go 450. Bring it close. Oh, negative 300. Anyways, to your point, I guess with the code thing, is I know that when After Effects at one point they were doing a major architectural overhaul of everything because a lot of the foundation code, and I could be wrong, so anyone who, if you work at Adobe or something, who knows better or differently, it's just what I heard. They had to change the root architecture of the program because it was based on old stuff from like back in the 90s or something. And because of that, it would have changed a lot of the default math. Some of the code changed. It's like when they did that, they changed from Flash to Flash MX or something. All the ActionScript language changed, which was actually really a problem for some people like myself because I didn't know how to use the new code and none of my old stuff I made worked anymore, which is just inevitable. It just happens anyway. So the thing I'm feeling like at the moment is first I have too many little shafts and I could probably increase the contrast on this thing overall because it's just lightening everything like a fog a bit. So let's just crush this down a bit and bring this up. Ooh, that doesn't look good. Let's change not the boost light, we want to change the ray length. Let's try to 10 or something. Yeah, it's just flooding everything gray. Whoops, that was dumb. 5. Okay, boost light. What does happen if we go? No, we need that. That's too intense. Okay. Let's see what that did. Okay, it's a little better. So I guess I kind of just want to see. This is at negative 300 now, so we need to bring it all the way up in front of Bambi. Not sure where it belongs. Definitely in front of that. So we're here. That's good. I might do one more, even though I'm not 100% sure I like what it's doing. Gross, that's horrible. What did I do that for? Let's duplicate this. Pull it forward to negative 650. It's kind of lightening everything, which isn't necessarily what I want to be doing right now. But let's just see. might change to, let's just go into the light shafts again, because right now I have, the light shafts are pretty broad and everywhere. I think I might want to even scale this down more and more, put them in the center so that I can control where there's like a light patch and a dark patch. The only thing I don't love that's happening at the moment is I'm getting this big plume of light ring, which is causing a tiny problem. But we're not going to worry about it for now. And let's take this, and maybe I'm going to increase the scale again. Let's go 300, and then I might fade the edges on this thing a bit. So let's go mask. I'm putting a mask on. I'm just double click that, which didn't work. Double click again. And then I'm just going to reduce the expansion to crop in the edges, and then increase the feathering. Just to soften up the edges a little bit. I more want to try to isolate those beams a little bit. Now what happens if I go, I'm just finding this graying background a little bit annoying. I almost wish it wasn't there. So I'm wondering if I increase this, helps it a bit. I can see the little dots more, but it's less, I'm getting less of just the shine overtaking everything. I'll scrunch those guys down a bit. Maybe scale this up overall. There, let's try that. Let's see how that looks. Okay, we've successfully added 18 minutes to this process. Doing great in extending the timeline of our deliverable. And effectively being a little bit late. So, okay, so if I bring this up, that's there. See, this has to be up more. It's just that plumy white stuff that I'm not liking too much because it's graying out the whole, not graying out, it's lightening the whole scene, which I don't want. I just want little beams to lighten it, which means I would technically want the contrast to be higher. But this thing, the shine, is adding all this extra stuff. Well, that's not helpful. Why would I do that? Let's try screen. No, because it's adding this whole bunch of like grayish stuff up here. And I'm just trying to figure out, is there a way I can reduce that? Obviously, boosting light helps to reduce that, but we also lose the shafts a little bit. Let's see where we can get the best amount of shaft versus, bring this up and then go, no, we don't want that. We want this mid-range really bright. There's probably another filter we could use that might be a little bit better for, that's not bad. We're getting them. It's just I might have to well, you know, we could do. Still that really frustrating. I'm finding frustrating anyway. I don't like the plumy thing that's happening. Like this stuff is, I almost just want the shafts. I don't want so much of this other stuff. Let's try a shimmer, see what that does. No, I know what shimmer does, but I'm kind of just seeing if I can, if it will help anything, because we're source point 2D, that's fine. It could be because the source point's so far away, but it's almost like I don't want to if I bring it too close. No. Okay, so that's the, it's basically, you see that like this thing, it's acting like a light source. So maybe if I bring it really far away, but now I have to boost the light to try to get these beams to look good. And that'll probably just bring back that graying more. It's sort of better, maybe. Let's maybe reduce the ray length and see. No. Okay, sorry guys, I'm going to stop doing this really quick. Okay. I know that with this, I could double it up and make it look better. I think. Where are you, Bambi? See, have a look. Let's have a look and see how this feels. I want it really subtle. I don't want like, oh, that's subtle, all right. Super subtle. Okay, let's do this really quick. I'm gonna go like this. Light chance. I'm probably doing something really basic and wrong, but I don't know what it is. I just want some strong beams. There's probably, okay. So I just made a new comp and I made stronger ones that are just basically duplicating the effect a whole bunch, which should make for some better light shafts in my opinion. Let's see what happens. Okay, they're there. And if they're moving, we're going to notice them a bit. Okay. So we have one at 750 and one at negative 300, negative 750. I don't think we need many more than that. I'm maybe put one just behind Bambi. Or it's not Bambi. I shouldn't say that. I'm gonna get pinged by Disney or something. Like, you can't say that. Or at least we're not monetizing these, I guess. But if they end up on YouTube, that could happen. I don't know if they have voice recognition yet. Okay. So now that we've spent all this time adding practically invisible light beams, let's render for a second and then maybe call it quits. I would love to add like little particles and stuff floating around in the air, but I mean, we're just getting out of hand at that point. This might take a minute because we have depth of field on, but I do want to see the whole effect together. Maybe what I should do is render more at the end. Let's go more down here. Or no, that's where he stopped. The she, Bambi deer creature stops moving. The animation actually only goes to 7 seconds. I just have the shot extended to a little bit further than that unnecessarily. The only thing I want to do after this, just for us to wrap up, is just a quick color correction pass on it. And just touch on the basics of that, see what we get out of the color correction. Maybe I'll use, usually I use like magic bullet and stuff, but maybe I'll just for the sake of demonstration use synthetic aperture since it comes with After Effects. It's not something you have to buy on the side. I like Magic Bullet though. It's not, I don't think it's that expensive just for Magic Bullet itself. Like looks isn't that expensive, but it's definitely, it's definitely worth it. I mean, I think anyway. I use it all the time. I might tweak some of the animation of the deer too, because I feel like its mouth opens too many times. We're probably not even going to see his light shafts. They're probably going to be barely noticeable. We may even just ruin the shot. I did this thing on this train shot, which maybe it'll show up in 4K for Let There Be Light, where the headlight of the train had all these snowflakes in it and stuff, and smoke and everything. It looked really cool. But then when it was in the shot and the train was like this big, you couldn't even see what was happening in the light. I mean, it added like a nice little bit of noise and stuff to it. It'll probably show up in the 4K resolution, which is more why I did it, but still, it's funny the amount of work that you can do on something. And okay, the light chaps are there. I see them. I'm not sure if you guys will see them. Probably won't. They're kind of there. You can see them creating a little bit of density. I think I'm going to leave this thing. It's fine. I think it's good. It's good. It's more than adequate. It's like I said, I was using it kind of as an opportunity to demonstrate some stuff. So I think we did our job. There's lots of nice movement in the frame. It's alive. It's cool. Might be still a little bit too much in places, but we'll see. If it is, I'll just tone it down. But I'm not going to know until I do a final render, and that's why it's important for us here at ED Films to have to have a pretty good rendering computer because it's those little glitches and iterations that happen that you just can't tell until you render the whole thing. And I've been in a lot of situations where I have, I only have a couple hours to render something. So I have like three computers that'll run sometimes and pump a shot out like this. It'll render, in 20 minutes versus an hour and a half. And that can be, for me, sometimes the difference between getting something submitted and not having it submitted because there could be like a little glitch or something. It just ruins the whole thing. Okay, so let's go and do I'm going to delete this. I believe this has a bunch of effects on it. So I'm going to go and we're going to do a color correction pass really quick. Now, usually I render it out first and then do a color correction pass because it's faster. But I'm just going to do this really quick for demonstration for you guys and also just to get something in there. I don't ever render, unless I'm in a complete crunch, I don't render a pass with color correction on it. I always render a raw pass and then I do a color corrected pass after. Where is this? It's here. Okay, this name needs to change. We'll call it Shot Bambi. I really shouldn't use that name. So I'm going to just drag this and drop it in here. I'm creating a new comp out of it. And I always make a comp CC for color correction. So this is where I'll put all the little visual finesse and effects. And I'm going to start with the last part of the shot, just for now. So Control Alt Y. So let's just start. I guess we'll do just color finesse. Cool. So you guys see the little beams? Cool. That's good. I agree they add a nice selector. Thank you for making me feel better about spending all that time on them. Okay. So go down to synthetic aperture. This comes with After Effects. It's actually a pretty decent color corrector. It can be a little intimidating if you haven't done color correction before. This is the simple interface. More than enough in most cases. They have the full interface. I'm just going to save because sometimes it crashes. Excuse me, sorry. Now, I'm not going to get into all these scopes and everything. There are color correction tutorials and stuff online. I'm not the best color corrector in the world, but these scopes, I'll just give you a quick breakdown. This is the luminance scope, and this tells you the range of luminance in your scene. So I wonder if this isn't the only thing with this color correction program is, for me, I'm used to some pretty robust color correcting. You can do some pretty good stuff in DaVinci, which is free, I believe. You can download DaVinci Resolve for free, which is a beautiful color correction system. But it is just like another program to export stuff in. You can do your edit in it too. But basically what I'm going to show you really quick is that this is your luminance here. And as I pull the master gamma up, you can see how everything sort of stops at 100. It's clipping itself automatically, like, for you, but you can shove this up. And this changes as we move. This down here at the bottom are your darks, and up here are your lights. And as you push the gamma up, you can see on the curve too, this is your lights up here. These are your darks. You're pushing all your darks into the light range. So your darkest dark right now here is sitting at 40, or around 40. So that's just a general, and here you can crush it all down. So your lightest lights, you can see these little, I don't know if you can see them in the stream because it's probably compressed a little bit, but there's these little tiny dots sitting in the light area. So this is essentially a version of your image in a scope. You can see, and actually it's cool, when I used to work at the Banff Center film editing, you can essentially watch, we had these scopes and they were all like real time on hardware. You could watch the movie in these scopes and you could sometimes see the picture almost because it's like a 2D version of the picture, or a one-dimensional version of the picture. It's neat. Okay, so usually what I do is we'll go into, I really like using the color wheels. They're more of my favorite ones to work with, if I can find them. Secondary color. This is limiting. I like it, the 3 color wheels. I'm trying to remember if it probably may not be in this one. No, it's not. That's on your secondary. So I really like using the 3 color wheels, so I don't tend to go into the full interface. Um, this stuff is actually for hue, light, saturation, this kind of stuff. This is pretty cool for taking, if you want to take, like, for instance, your saturation out of your highlights. It's actually really, like, I don't know if you guys can see it. It might depend on the stream quality, but it can be really effective in adjusting ranges of color and saturation, which you have all these tools in Magic Bullet as well. And in here we can push the shadow saturation up, and then you could drop the highlights way out. It just creates a different feeling. If you take your midtones, you can drop your saturation way out. It's kind of neat. You get a whole bunch of different results. It's really fun to play with it. You can just play with the different things. But that's like a little more complicated. So what I was going to just show you really quick is just a general approach that I take initially. I usually leave my master alone. It's very sensitive to play with the master, even though it doesn't seem to be doing anything. This is a very sensitive broad stroke. This is something you usually, when I was taught color correction, this is one of the last things you touch. So let's just reset this. So usually what I like to do for a scene like this is I first hit the shadows, and I might like cool them off or warm them up just to have a look and see how it feels. I tend to go for cooler bluish shadows just because it's a bit more naturalistic, I suppose. And right now the shadows there's a little bit, they're not crushed enough. So as you add color to them, they appear to get lighter even though they're not. You're just noticing them more. So we don't have like really pure blacks in the foreground. It's definitely have more of a black in the eye, but not in the foreground, which is fine. With the midtones, we can push into the warm greenish color, and you see what that's done is that's brought this middle area a little bit warmer. So green is dangerous. Green is a hard color to manage because it tends to like make characters look a little bit sickly. It's definitely a tricky one when you're doing human color correction with skin tones and stuff. Highlights, I mean, you gotta be careful how hard you push this stuff. It's really easy to go overboard. So we can just look at it without. So you can see we're already getting a little, to me anyway, the colors by default are a little bit greenish. And then once we've color corrected, things have gotten a little more a little warmer, a little more colorful. Possibly too much. So we have our curves here. Curves can be a little bit tricky to get your head around. But essentially down here is as we pull this down, you see that curve. Like if you do this, as soon as the line goes flat, it means you've crushed the black. So anything that's darker than this part of the black here is completely black now. Not usually recommended to do stuff like that. You usually want to try to keep the curve a little bit subtle. So if I want to darken these foreground things, I wonder if there's a way just to reset this after the fact. Probably not, so you just have to drag this in this. If I just want to push this foreground stuff down a little bit because I feel like it's a bit blown out, or the color, I usually will put a little anchor there and then just dip this down a little bit. And you see I've already darkened that a lot. So I'm basically saying take the lowest blacks in this range from gray and just darken them a little bit more. And that'll give me just a little touch. And I want to try to leave this stuff alone. Naturally, it's going to come up a little bit in this area, but I don't want to I don't want this to look like this, which gets a little too hot and contrasty. So if I put this little weight here, or this little point here, it kind of locks the middle area down a little bit. I mean, you can bring it up a bit if you want to. See, you really start, this image now to me feels kind of 70s or maybe even 60s as far as film stock, because it's gotten a little bit contrasty and it's gotten a bit crushed in some ways. So look at the original, and here now we have this sort of, almost reminds me of like one of those weird little things where you pull a little camera Viewmaster. It's got that vibe to it a bit stained yellow, and it feels like those old Disney Viewmasters or the Flintstone ones or something. Anyways, so playing with all these little values, you can really do a lot. If I feel like I have too much warmth in this, and it's not in the darks, but I feel like there's maybe too much warmth in the middle range, I can start pulling the red down a bit. This stuff is risky though, I mean, because as you pull the red down, your green and your blue are going to get stronger. So then if you pull your green down, so I'm pulling green out of the highlights are going to naturally get a bit more blue and purple. So you see that we're starting to get, and if I put the red back, we're starting to get like a little bit of blown out of red. So it's good to experiment. You can see I'm affecting only this upper color range, right? I'm not affecting down here. So that's that area. It seems in this image, like if we were to look at the scope and the full interface, I'll just show you really quick. Most of our colors and image are living in this lower area. So when we do color correction, we're going to really dramatically affect. If we adjust highlights, it's just these areas here, right? We're just adjusting a very tiny percentage of the image, but if we're adjusting our mid-lows, we're affecting the most of the image because it's a dark image. It's a relatively dark image, which could be good, could be bad. I think it makes it a little more cozy feeling. Excuse me. But yeah, that's really, again, that's like all about taste. I feel like it's probably too contrasty, so I will probably I'll probably like redo the color correction on this. Also, I feel like potentially there's too much saturation. So this is where we come into this like hue, saturation, and lightness. Feel like there's too much saturation in the mid tones, possibly the darks. So I can come in and just pull that down. I mean, this is like a really basic kind of crash course look at what the color correction stuff does. It's better just to experiment with it, but if you have no grasp of color correction at all, this stuff makes no sense, and you start pushing stuff around and trying to make stuff happen, and it's just completely confusing. It doesn't, it'll just drive you a little bit crazy. So one of the other things we could do is we were adjusting the shadow tones. You can go in here again with hue, light, saturation, and we can desaturate the shadows a little bit if we're finding there's just too much color in them. I think they're fine the way they are, but this is how this stuff works. As far as like vibrance and brightness and all that kind of stuff, what did I do? It's 50. It should be 100, I imagine. I'm not so clear on all like vibrance. I'm not quite sure what that does. It feels like it adds saturation, but I know it's not saturation. It's something else. Brightness and contrast are pretty standard. Brightness will always gray stuff out because it's just adding white to everything. So if you were to watch it's almost like pushing the gamma up in some ways. If you are going to increase brightness, you typically, if you don't want to lose your blacks, you have to increase your contrast too, because brightness will always gray your blacks out. And not that it's always a bad thing, but one of the goals of when you're doing color correction to have a rich image is to try not to lose your blacks. You don't want to lose. You do want blacks to be in your image, and you do want your lights, but you don't want to gray out all your blacks. It tends to make the image look a little washed out, which can be desirable if you want a filmic look or effect. But those effects, if you're going to go that route, I would then let's just turn this off. And I'll go into Magic Bullet and just show you what that does. It's pretty handy. I actually really like it. And we'll just start from scratch on it really quick. So that's under Magic Bullet. Looks. I mean, you can do Colorista too, which is more like a color correction thing. But as far as when it comes to like just getting a general quick feeling on stuff, I find Magic Bullet is usually the way to go for me. And then I'll do like subtle color tweaks on the actual color wheels. It's taking forever to load up for some reason. I'll just give it a sec. I guess and I've said this before, one of the downsides of Magic Bullet though is in any of these programs is we are in the age of Instagram filters, and people that are, I guess, pros are pretty critical of Instagram filters and the Instagram look, and that's something you can definitely run the risk of. They have in looks, they have a whole bunch of presets, which can be really good places to start. It really depends on the look. Some of the looks are really aggressive, but you can tone them down in the strength down here, so you can play with them, or just even look what it looks like without, what it looks like with it. So you get different treatments. Like they have this film print filter, and the film print is designed to act like certain film stock. So that's if you want to push the film feeling a bit more, which I usually like to do, even though I know it's totally fake, and I know it's fake. I know I'm kind of, just making my stuff look, I guess in a way like hipstery. That's probably a horrible thing to say, but I do like the look of film, and I don't work with film, so it's nice to be able to capture some of that with filters. So these films are all every film stock in the back in the day, they all treated light and color a little bit differently, and a lot of old film stocks were really bad um, with dark skin tones, and they lost a lot of subtlety. They look at you can see they're all pushing colors. These are designed to be like film stocks. So usually what I will do is find the one I'm into the most, and then I will start from that point. I kind of like this one because I do like the cools and stuff that are happening, but I think it is turning everything more into the blues versus the purples, which isn't bad. Like it's a new way of looking at the image. I really have to be careful though with this stuff because sometimes it's just nice because I feel like I'm looking at an image again for the first time, and that can be risky. That can be risky because you're like it just makes the image feel cool to you again, and you've been working on it for so long. So now the image just feels cool, it feels new again, and it's only because you've added all these like filters to it, which may be overkill and actually not that nice. The grain is pretty good. I find the grain effect on these two ones pretty nice. I think I'll probably just reset this. I don't even know why they have this on, honestly. It doesn't look like they're even using it. Okay, so the thing I think is a little bit risky is how this thing is tinting the film so aggressively. This is the whole vintage to modern. Modern tends to have more contrast. Vintage, it's like a little more washed out, which can be desirable. I guess like my original idea with the whole shot was to be like one of those 1950s books, like kids books. The thing I don't like what's happening with this film stock stuff is I'm definitely losing some of my lights, like my highlights, which is what happens. Like you're going to get clipping, you're going to lose image integrity. Like you see that like we have these nice highlights around the eyes and stuff like that. Those are all getting flattened out. So we're losing all this like shading and stuff, and it's going and it's getting all flat and kind of gray blue, which is not really desirable. It doesn't seem like that at first when you look at it, but I think that's another thing. It's important to switch back and forth between the two and actually see like what are you gaining from this aesthetic and what are you not like. And that's the thing too, is because we're working with paintings and we're not working with real imagery. These filters can be really destructive, especially if you're not painting realistically. It's really hard to maintain the let's just see here. We're like, cause see, it's like there's this thing where it's clipping the levels at the top, so all these lights are becoming gray, and that's partially because of the vintage, but it's also because of other things. So it's such a tricky balance. It's like a balancing act the whole time. So this is a very delicate one here. Sometimes I find it's better just to use the mouse, not to use the tablet with this. So I've just disabled, I'm trying to use this a little bit without killing the integrity of the image. So one of the things too is to just jump back and forth between the old image and the new one. And for me, it's trying to get back to roughly where we're at with the slight effect of the filter. Like I know certain things are going to happen. Maybe this vintage and slash modern is too high here. I don't know. But right now I'm just finding the saturations getting blown out a bit in the reds, but I don't mind that. Like that's something I can adjust here. So here we have HSL, like hue light saturation in the colors. So we can put this in. And then we can actually find the colors that we feel like are too blown out, like my oranges, for instance, and just pull the saturation out of some of the orange and a little bit out of the reds. So I'm finding it's just like too hot on the head. So now you can see I've just taken that down just a little bit, but I feel like now maybe I've gone too far. Bonk. Anyways, this is a tricky balance. It's very, very tricky. I like what it's doing to my greens here, though, and I do like the push into the blues a little bit. I think I like the blues that are happening. I'm not 100%. There's a color temperature push that you can do here, too. but I don't like how warm that gets. I think it goes between kind of a greenish to like a purple, a purpley color or something. Back there in the shadows, so those aren't the shadows, but that cool range. I do like my purples. I'm kind of sad we're losing those a little bit, but I don't mind that bluish because I think it works really nice with the trees. And so basically, we're green and purple are they really work well together. We've shifted into more of a reddish. It looks like we've added blue or something to it, or maybe I don't know what, I can't remember. I'm not good at this. Maybe we've taken red out of it. We've taken red out, and that's turning this into more of a grayish green and this into a blue, which is fine, but we can adjust some of this stuff if we want to. This will help. This will get back some of our contrast, but we could also push those more into the purples if I really want to get that purpley area coloring back, but it's going to happen everywhere, so be warned. And the other thing is as we push the color in, like we talked about before, in this specific setup, what I can do is as you add color, things tend to feel darker. So this, I've really saturated those blues, that shadows with blue, so everything feels darker. Just go in here and you lighten them up. This is way too heavy, right? Obviously, it's going to make it look pretty gross. I mean, gross for this, because it could be a very desirable effect. Let's just bring this back down to, let's just maybe reset this. So I'm going to push these here a little bit. So I kind of like it like that, I think. Okay, and then let's just turn the whole thing off. So I feel like we're getting the scene to pop a little bit more, which is nice. We have a little vignette on it. Is the vignette active? It doesn't feel like it's doing anything. Oh, the amount is super low. I don't know, honestly, if we need a vignette because we're naturally vignetting the whole thing with the design. So it's almost a little bit redundant. So I think we should get rid of it. We have some noise on it. And here we have the grain strength at 50% and 50%. So together it's 100. So I don't want to crank that too much. There's some other cool little filters and stuff. Like I like edge softness. I put the quality up pretty high and then drop this down a little bit. This just kind of every lens. I remember if I was watching Star Wars, the first one, and I noticed in some of the shots, like I know, and I've said this before too, is that I know chromatic aberration and stuff is like super trendy and it's like people kind of hate it. Feels like everyone's just sticking those filters on everything. But it is a real thing and it does actually happen. And I was looking at the first Star Wars film, and at the edges of all the shots is a slight blur and a very small amount of chromatic aberration, which I guess this is really trendy now. Everybody puts this on all their artwork. Like, people do it in Photoshop concept images now. You can see like doing this like color shift thing. I just think you have to be really, really careful with it. I go with pretty small numbers. Kind of my default a little bit, and then mostly because I don't want to break apart the colors in the image so much, but it does seem to happen more along the edges. There's also a pretty nice chromatic aberration distortion filter that Red Giant has, or not Red Giant, yeah, Red Giant, or the Universe plugins, which are pretty good. It's really intense, like it's like way overkill, but it definitely has some nice features. I guess the real problem with all this stuff, it's sort of like if you guys played games at all, like Call of Duty or anything, we went through that whole period where everyone was splattering the frame with stuff, the lens with stuff, and they were also putting um, lens gobos on everything, like dirt. Wherever there was a lens flare, you would see dirt on the lens, and it just got a little bit like it just became a look of the time. And that's something I do try to avoid a little bit if I can. I feel that's like looking pretty nice. Definitely lost the greens. I don't know if that's a good or bad thing. I kind of like the forest. It feels a bit autumny, and I don't know. But I mean, I could push back possibly in the mids. We'll see. We'll see if it's possible to push back some of those greens. I just don't want to kill. I don't want too much green going into the fawn. So I've pushed the greens back a little bit. I kind of like it. There's probably too much blue on the bottom of this font. That probably has more to do with my filter. So you can see I'm picking up a lot of blue now. That has a lot to do with the way I did the effect on the font, so I'll probably fix that. But I'd say for now, as a color pass, this is pretty decent. Let's see how it looks. Yeah, I think it looks pretty cool. This is a pretty nice little shot, I feel like. Oh, Colin Harvey is saying that they have glasses, so everything they see has chromatic aberration. Yeah, that's funny. Um, so you're just like your entire reality is just a walking Instagram hipster filter. That's very awesome. The only thing I think that might be happening here that's a little bit not awesome is we are like these blacks are pretty black. But one of the cool things is since we haven't rendered out the final yet, we could go back in here and I could bump the ambient light or the foreground light up a little bit more. Let's just really crank it, see what happens. Okay, so actually let's undo that. What I want to do is because I'm doing color correction here, I'll take a picture and then I'll boost this light to like 220. And then we'll go back and see what happens. And we'll see what kind of difference that makes in the frame. It's not significant, but we get a little bit more detail back in those dark areas. I just don't want them totally crushed down and losing all detail. I prefer this shot specifically to be lighter rather than darker, but I also don't want to blow out what's happening on the little deer itself. So these here, we want to make sure that we're not peaking too much. And that I would do in the, when I look at my monitors, like the actual color correction monitors. The other thing too is to make sure that you're at, where is it? Where it's in our preferences or project settings. Make sure you're at 16 bits per channel minimum. Things get the color correction stuff is pretty clunky at 8 bits. You'll notice like banding and problems and stuff like that. So, anyways, I think generally I like this. I think this is a bit of a hole. Like there's a bit, and I squint, I get a nice like patch of light, but this is a really dark hole. So I feel like this is getting crushed down a bit too much. So I'm gonna fix that. I'm starting to sniffle all the time. Okay. And the other thing is I am darkening this stuff intentionally a lot, so I could probably like tone down on that a bit. Although it gets really purple. Let's just lighten this up just a touch. I might just have to tone down the purple of that light as well. The foreground light, it's just too purple, even though I like it in some ways. It is really pushing the art into a very specific color range. So this may have just changed everything. It's a little better. It's less of a hole. Like it's even made this less of a big pit of black, of dark. So that's without. So I think that's a little bit better. It's just you really got to avoid dark holes in the, at least in my opinion, in the composition. So this is a little bit better. Okay, so I think I'm almost comfortable enough to do a render of this. I'm just trying to think, was there anything else we had to deal with? We were supposed to be doing something and I just forgot what I was supposed to be doing. What was it? Oh, the bluish tint under the belly of the little deer should be greenish or kind of a warmish color because of all the stuff that's around at the bottom. So on the deer itself, this will be, I guess, a good opportunity since the few of you that are here right now to sort of check out how the deer is treated. There's a lot of stuff. It's sort of a lot going on to make the deer look the way it looks. I have tune filters on it. I have like these boiling textures here. I have displacement filters on it to give it a little bit of texture vibration that come directly from the paper changing, which I'll get into when I do an overview of the character. And then I have an effects pass. So we're getting like a little behind the scenes of this character. This character has a whole bunch of layer styles put on it. Without them, well, this one doesn't have, that's because it's a mid one. I had to do it in a separate layer. But without them, things get really flat. So there's these layer styles I'm using on the character itself. They kind of round everything out and give it some shape. And then inside of this composition, or not this, sorry, inside the legs and stuff, I have the same thing. And I also have shadows, this stuff. This is the little character with the shadows all put in. So I'm using duplicate layers. So like these guys here, if I just turn off this stuff here, oh, I guess you can't even tell actually. I have the Gaussian blur on it. This is just a duplicate of this guy's layer offset. Just give me one more sec. I'll do it this way. Maybe it'll be a bit more clear. I've just duplicated layers and moved them around a little bit and then blurred them out. And then I've used the deer's body as an alpha matte, so that I get these nice little shadows that form from the ear and from the leg and stuff. And I just position them in a way that they don't reveal too much the edges of the puppeted layers or the cutout layers. So you get stuff like this. It just feels a little bit more round and organic. And then on top of this, I've put like a layer like a layer style, and it's the bevel and emboss. So if I turn that off, it looks pretty flat. And then I've got this. So what I basically have is the depth's at 100. The size is pretty big. Soften it up as much as possible, and adjust the angle as required. This isn't set to overlay, so this is like the highlights. So if you turn those off, they're not there. You can see them now. They're there. Gives a bit of roundness. This is the one I wanted to fix. This is my multiply shadow at the bottom, and right now it's very teal colored. I should probably move more into like the greenish warm colors, even though it won't round it out in a design way as nicely, but it's definitely more reflective of what's actually happening under the deer. So you get the greenish color bounce light, the greenish warm bounce light, which should be coming from the bottom of the forest more than a blue. It's not a blue. Actually, we can push the saturation up a little bit. So it just helps you sculpt the character a little bit more. I think I want to stay a little bit in the greenish realm. Maybe I'll desaturate a bit just to, even though it's like the deer is under orange stuff. The other option is if I did like an overlay and I made it dark, but like also kind of bright. But I feel like that just looks like he's been into mustard or something. So I kind of want to darken it, but just give it a little tiny bit of green in there. And the same goes with this. So this fill is really blue. So that's creating a bluish shadow. I want more of a, again, kind of a greenish warm shadow. Just go there so it matches a bit. And possibly finding the shadow a bit dark. There. So maybe this will look better. I'm not 100% sure. I'm not a huge fan of the color. We'll just go like that. The green is a bit too green. And then do the same thing here. A little more like that. Cool. Okay, so now, because everything is all embedded together, now we can have a look and see if this blue goes away. It'll just take a sec. Because that's just too blue. I mean, shadows are bluish, but it should actually be warmer shadows, not super cool shadows. So I feel like that's a lot better already. It doesn't feel like, it'd be fine if he was like standing on a ledge and we had some sky peeking through or something to blue him up, but what else is there? I feel like overall that's working. I do feel like this is a bit blown out at the moment, so there's a couple things we could do. We could go into here and just fix it because I feel like this area is a bit hot. Let's see if it pops up. I think we just bumped the exposure too much in one of the settings. but I'm not going to render the color correction version. See, it's like the thing is the color correction is a bit slow when you're dealing with these frames that are not rendered TIFF sequences, but I think what probably happened here is we have, what is it? Is there anything I can do? Might be better. I don't love their curve tools in this program, or sorry, in this plugin. They're not horrible, but I just feel like let's go here, and I don't want to pull, I just want to pull down just this area right here. You see what I'm doing? This is really blown out to me when we're looking at, see if I can zoom in. No, won't let me for some reason. Zoom, come on. There we go. Okay, so here, this stuff is really, really bright, and I kind of feel like it needs to come down a bit. So I'm just, if I dip that down and just bring this up, you gotta be careful when you're doing like little tight revisions like this, because you can create crazy little bands. But this brings down that brightness a lot. Like, look at that. Or do we even notice? Hardly. We hardly even notice. It's probably really hard to see in the stream, but there is this, it just helps kill it off a little bit. I know it's super subtle, but it'll make a difference. Like, it's less hot feeling. We'll see. All right, so I think I'm going to just render this out and see how it feels. I think it's a billion times better than what it should be. It's like, I guess like I feel like we've captured that idea of the 1950s illustrated kids book thing that I wanted with the colors, and kind of feels like a 70s or 60s painting. Like, well, not a 70s. It'd be like one of those things if you were a kid in the 70s and you went to your, grandparents' house and there's this book kicking around and there'd be it probably feels like it'd be a picture in one of those books, like one of those old golden books. So anyways, I think I'm going to stop the stream because we're now at 3 hours. I went 1 hour over what I should have been doing. So now that we've completely smashed past the deadline, and now I can stop and get so I'll do a render and I'll post the results on YouTube. So I think just as far as the render output's going to go, since I don't actually ever demonstrate this thing, I'm just going to press Control M. This is a full HD, so I'm going to do a TIFF sequence without alpha, trillions of colors that will preserve as much color information as in this shot. And then I've got a render drive. Whoops, don't do that. I've got a render drive I'm putting this on, which is work in progress A. And so I usually break it up by shots. So I have these shots raw. I don't know the shot number of this one yet. I'm just going to call it, we'll call it shot. I'm not going to, raw. And I call it raw because it's like uncolor corrected. So we just put it there and make sure this just says raw. W, and we don't need a subfolder. I could have just let it create a subfolder, which is totally fine. And then I'll save it. I could also, if I want to have multiple computers rendering it, I'll just put that on so that if I decide to get another computer to go on it, it'll just start eliminating frames. Yeah, and that's it. So it's at full resolution, TIFF sequence with full 16-bit color, and then we'll just render away. And I think I will call this very long stream a wrap. Thanks for hanging out with me as I worked on this. It's cool. I think the shot's gonna be really great, and I will be back again soon. We're really close to locking down our schedule, which is super exciting, and we are also setting up a streaming space in the new studio where we can have more of the members of the team talk about stuff and group meetings and stuff like that. So it's really exciting. So yeah, thanks for hanging out, guys, and we'll be online again soon. Thank you. See ya. Thanks for the help.